Chapter 746. Crack. With a clear cracking sound, the delicate teacup was broken into countless pieces in his hand. The sharp porcelain pierced into the flesh, and the warm tea mixed with some blood flowed down and dripped on the ground, making a subtle and dull sound. Liquanta quietly lowered his head and stared at the tea and blood in his hand, frowning. "What's wrong?" In a panicked voice, Phoenix, whose body had become very cumbersome, walked over cautiously and asked in a concerned voice. The news that she was pregnant was no longer a secret. It was 10 months old, and she was about to give birth. After Li Hong had died, she left Lin and officially lived with deity. Li Quantu quietly stared at his palm and was silent for a long time. Phoenix looked at him nervously and subconsciously touched her belly with both hands. The child's gender had been checked. It was a boy. Li Quantu seemed to have been in a happy mood because of the news. But at this moment, Phoenix clearly saw an emotion on his face that she had never seen before. She couldn't tell what that emotion was. It was as if countless negative emotions were mixed together. It was faint, but it was clearly there. Hesitation, confusion, anger, incomprehension, and a little panic and inexplicable. "I don't know." Deity shook his hand. "It's just, I suddenly feel very bad." It was as if he was about to lose the most important thing in his life. He did not know what he was going to lose, but the feeling of losing something was so strong that he could clearly hear his heart beating faster and faster. The injuries that he had initially suppressed were showing signs of relapse again. Weakness and exhaustion gradually spread from his body to his brain. He took a deep breath and rubbed his forehead, feeling a little headache. "Let's stay here today. Don't leave," Liquanta said slowly. The premonition in his heart had become more and more intense, and it was still growing stronger. The feeling of losing something was clearly assaulting him. Liquanta didn't know why it was like this, but it was clear that the phoenix and the child in her belly were the most important things in his heart. Staying here would at least minimize the risk. Liquanta took a deep breath and suppressed the increasingly obvious feeling of irritation in his heart. He walked to the window and looked at the sunset outside. Their current location was Ross City in Tian'an. Ross City was located in the central area of Tian'an. To the north was Xianyuan City, and to the south was a city that had just been renamed Burning City. Sandwiched between Xianyuan City and Burning City, this was the neutral city with the most complicated situation in the entire Heavenly South. Liquantu had been in Luo City for nearly half a year. This was originally the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in Tian'an. But over the past 6 months, all the superpowers have been infiltrating Luo City, and the most brazen ones were Zhongzhou State and East Island. The situation of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital had become more and more delicate. Liquantu had not recovered from his serious injury. Daybreak had not recovered to its peak state since it was attacked half a year ago. The top officials of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital had collectively moved from Heaven Capital to Tian'an. Standing in this position, it didn't return to East Island, but it also didn't turn to Zhongzhou State. Without the support from the national level, and the highest combat capability was seriously injured, the influence of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was greatly weakened. Ross City was originally the territory of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. When the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was first established, Deity, in his peak state, once fought with Wang Tianzong here, which completely established the influence of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in Tian'an. Now Ross City was constantly being infiltrated by other forces. In the base camp of Heaven Capital, and even in the entire East Island, Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Training School were also devouring the interests of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. East Island completely turned a blind eye to this, but everyone could clearly feel that East Island's patience was gradually fading. Li Quantu didn't express his position, and East Island was getting more and more vigilant towards the entire Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Some of the old people of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital had already joined Xianyuan City. Li Quantu often looked in the direction of Xianyuan City and remained motionless. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital had appeared in the Dark World for only 4 years, But with his serious injury in Eastern Europe, the entire purgatory of Heaven Capital had given people the impression that it was past its prime. But Xinyuan City, 100 miles away, was like the rising sun. In the past 6 months, although Li Tianlan was still in the desert prison, the situation in Xinyuan City had gradually become stable. The system of Xinyuan City was not modeled after that of Zhongzhou State, and there was no Xinyuan City Parliament. After Mayor Ning Qianqing's position was gradually stabilized, he appointed the chief judge and chief administrative officer of Xinyuan City. Almost every day, Xinyuan City was getting closer and closer to the peak. Li Quantu didn't express any opinion on this and kept silent. The sun outside the window gradually sank. Li Quantu was silent for a long time, and his frown became tighter and tighter. The intuition that he was about to lose something had almost become a substance. He couldn't do anything about it, and he didn't even have a clue. "Your Highness, have some tea." Phoenix made a cup of tea and handed it to Li Quantu. "You don't have to do these things." Li Quantu took the teacup and said, "Pay attention to rest. It's okay." Phoenix smiled sweetly. "The doctor also said that proper exercise is good for me and the baby." Li Quantu smiled and reached out to touch Phoenix's face. The palm that was cut by the ceramic was stained with blood, and it fell on Phoenix's face. Li Quantu's smile completely froze. He lowered his head and looked at his palm that was still bleeding. The blood beads flowed very slowly. The dark red color emerged from the wound silently, became full, and then slowly fell. Li Quantu's pupils contracted little by little, and the depths of his eyes gradually became crazy. Phoenix finally found that something was wrong. She stared at Li Quantu's palm, and her face changed slightly. Why didn't it heal? Li Quantu didn't speak, and he seemed to be in trance. At this moment, he finally realized what he was going to lose. More than 20 years ago, the case of treason was settled. Great Master Wu Wei took away the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State to rebuild his life when he was about to die. From then on, he could be regarded as carrying the foundation of the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State. The endless vitality completely rebuilt his completely broken foundation and restored him to the peak of the invincible realm. But Li Quantu never got the core of the dragon vein, the flower he missed. For years ago, in the final battle of Heaven Capital, Great Master Wu Wei, who was supposed to be impartial, gave the flower to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan came back from the dead. That was, from that moment on, the dragon vein reunited in Li Tianlan's body. He carried the dragon vein on his back, and the infinite luck and vitality supported him to travel far away for 3 years, and finally came to this point. The dragon vein became more and more magnificent. The fate of Zhongzhou State became stronger and stronger. Li Quantu was dissatisfied with this, but he did not panic, because during this time, even though Li Tianlan carried the dragon vein, Li Quantu was still nourished by part of the vitality of the dragon vein. The dragon moved its head, but not its tail. If the dragon vein that Li Tianlan carried had become the dragon's head, then from a metaphysical point of view, Li Quantu was standing on the dragon's tail. The luck was not fixed, but he still felt that it was possible for him to recapture the dragon vein. Because of this, in half a year, his originally serious injury had been stabilized again, and he had the hope of completely recovering to the peak state. With the nourishment of the dragon vein's vitality, his body was much faster than people in the same realm, both in terms of healing and recovery. But now, the ceramic cut his palm, but it was just a flesh wound. Why hadn't this small wound healed after such a long time? Li Quantu's heart sank to the bottom in an instant. The long-lost panic emerged from his heart. He narrowed his eyes, took a deep breath, and suddenly said, "Don't wait for me for dinner." Phoenix's face was pale, and she did not dare to speak. "There are some problems. I need to calm down. I'm going to meditate," Li Quantu said slowly. He turned directly and walked into his meditation room. The whole world quieted down when he closed his eyes. The irritation in his heart disappeared little by little. Countless noises seemed to leave him, getting farther and farther away. Li Quantu's body and mind were calm. At this moment, it seemed that all the trivial things had left him. Suddenly, Li Kuang-tu, who had been immersed in meditation, opened his eyes, and his face changed dramatically. A hazy fog appeared silently in the meditation room. The fog was getting thicker, and the increasing fog almost covered everything in the meditation room. Li Kuang-tu's body suddenly trembled. At this moment, he clearly felt that the injuries in his body were healing crazily, and some internal injuries were also getting better. But the vitality that originally belonged to the dragon vein in his body was constantly being drawn out of his body, and more. Countless vitality was flowing in his body, healing his injuries, and then gushing out of his body. The white fog in the meditation room gradually thickened and faded. All the fog disappeared, but it did not return to Li Kuang-tu's body. Li Kuang-tu suddenly stood up, and his face was a little twisted. How is this possible? He kept taking deep breaths and gritting his teeth. Who stole my dragon vein? The dragon's head and tail could not be seen. If Li Tianlan was the dragon's head, then the dragon's tail could not appear on him. If it was not Li Tianlan, who could it be? Li Kuang-tu's expression gradually calmed down and finally became expressionless. Standing in the meditation room, he was silent for a long time and then said to himself indifferently, "Why?" He took out his mobile phone and dialed number. "Your Highness." The phone was quickly connected, and Dawn's voice sounded. "I'll give you 3 days. No matter what, bring Xian Xuanzi of Zhongzhou State to me." Li Kuang-tu said expressionlessly. Xian Xuanzi was resting in the sanatorium. He woke up slowly. In the afternoon, the hazy winter sun shone through the window, quiet and warm. "You're awake." Saint's voice sounded. Xian Xuanzi opened his mouth, a little confused. There were still shooting stars in his pupils before he passed out. At this time, looking at the sunshine outside the window, he seemed a little dull. "What happened?" Xian Xuanzi was silent for a long time, and then asked slowly, "I should be the one asking you this." Saint's tone was extremely solemn. "What happened last night?" "Last night?" Xian Xuanzi asked back. "You've been in a coma for nearly 18 hours. Have you forgotten what happened last night?" Saint asked with a frown. Xian Xuanzi was silent for a while. Then he smiled bitterly and said softly, "What did you see last night?" Saint was slightly stunned. His eyes were full of thoughts, and finally, they all turned into fear and dread. Xian Xuanzi looked at him quietly, without saying a word. "Sword light." After a long time, Saint finally gave his answer softly. At that moment last night, when he looked up at the starry sky, all he saw was sword light. Tens of thousands of sword lights cut through the sky like shooting stars, illuminating the night sky. They were incomparably gorgeous, but extremely dangerous. The sword light flew wantonly, and at that moment, it seemed to tear the world apart. Saint was already an expert of the invincible realm, but in the face of the overwhelming sword light, he didn't even have a chance to resist. At that moment, he was like a real naninity or a weak child facing an expert at the peak of the invincible realm. He didn't even have the desire to resist. "It's sword light," Xian Xuanzi said to himself. "What about you?" Saint suppressed the fear in his heart and asked, "What did you see?" "That's luck," Xian Xuanzi said softly. The overwhelming luck and karma suddenly became chaotic. If it was in the eyes of ordinary people, it might be a shooting star. In different people's eyes, there are different scenes, but in the end, it's all karma. He paused and said softly, "Something is going to happen." "It's already happened." Saint took a deep breath. When the president met Yi Dongsheng last night, he suddenly fell into a coma without warning and hasn't woken up yet. Tianlan also fell into a coma in the desert prison. All the instruments have been used, but we can't find out what's going on. The nation's fate is in turmoil, and karma is intertwined. Those related to the nation's fate will definitely be affected. Xian Xuanzi said softly. When he spoke, his expression was calm, but there was a flash of complexity in his eyes. Intertwined karma? Saint frowned tightly. He didn't believe in the so-called karma and destiny, nor did he believe in the so-called metaphysics. He had seen great Master Wu Wei, and he was no stranger to Xian Xuanzi. Saint was very annoyed by this. He felt that these people were always mysterious and didn't speak human language, talking about things that he couldn't understand. But it didn't mean that they didn't exist. Saint generally stayed away from these people, but in this situation, how could he stay out of it? What do you mean? Make it clear. This is the clearest way to put it. Xian Xuanzi said slowly. I'm not an immortal. How can I make it clear? You think we're mysterious because we can only speculate. What you want is something that we can understand. We're not immortals, so how can we know? Last night, the mystery of heaven was chaotic, and I don't know what would happen. But some karma may be reversed. If the karma already exists, will the previous cause still happen? A lot of things may be intertwined. Some people who shouldn't have appeared, things that shouldn't have happened, shouldn't stop. Saint had a splitting headache and said directly, I don't care about that. How can I wake Tianlan up? Xian Xuanzi thought for a while and said softly, the dragon vein hasn't changed, and Tianlan should be fine. He sat up from the bed. I want to take a shower. Shower and change clothes? Saint was shocked for a moment. Just take a shower. Xian Xuanzi's mouth twitched, and he walked into the bathroom of the ward. He took a quick shower and came out in less than half an hour. He wore a brand-new Taoist robe, a snow-white horsetail whisk, and his dry long hair had been combed neatly. He looked like an immortal again. I want to see my daughter, Xian Xuanzi said. Saint spread out his hands. Go ahead. Xian Xuanzi nodded and turned to walk into another ward. Li lay quietly on the bed, motionless. Xian Xuanzi sat beside her, reached out his hand, and stroked her hair with a trembling hand, without saying a word. What are you thinking about? Saint came in and asked. I'm thinking about her daughter. Xian Xuanzi looked at Li Shi with kind eyes and murmured, Kunlun City is now closed, and we can't see her. Saint was silent for a while and said slowly. Xian Xuanzi's voice fell silent. The sunlight slowly shifted in the sky. After a long time, Xian Xuanzi smiled and said, Let's take a photo together. Saint looked at his smile and seemed to understand something. He found a camera and took a photo of the father and daughter seriously. Xian Xuanzi took a deep look at Li Shi, stood up, and said, Arrange a helicopter. I'm going to the desert. Saint nodded and replied, Yes. Xian Xuanzi left the ward, slowly went downstairs, slowly walked out of the inpatient building, came to the door, and waited silently. The sound of the helicopter whistling was faint, getting closer and closer. A monk, who looked a little tired, came from a distance. Xian Xuanzi took a few steps forward and took the small box with a flower on it from a monk. The helicopter gradually rose in the afternoon sunlight and flew to the desert. Body temperature is normal. Heartbeat is a little slow, but very powerful. Combined with the physical strength of His Highness, heartbeat is normal. Blood pressure is normal, and no virus is found in the blood. His Highness has no wound, and he is very healthy. In the warden's dormitory of the desert prison, countless physicians and doctors of traditional Chinese medicine from various fields in Zhongzhou State were busy, and everyone's faces were obviously filled with helplessness and anxiety. Lieutenant General Xiao Mahai of Zhongzhou State stood at the door and looked at this scene with a pale face. His body was cold, and he was at a loss. Li Tianlan had been in a coma for nearly a day. His coma came without warning, and there was no clue at all. Xiao Mahai only remembered that countless white mist came out of his dormitory. The endless white mist almost covered the whole prison, completely ignoring the obstruction of the room. In the familiar prison, Xiao Mahai stumbled through the white mist, and it took him nearly an hour to find Li Tianlan in a coma. Xiao Mahai, who was almost scared silly, reported the situation to Dongqing Wudi at once. Dongqing Wudi and Bai Qingxian rushed to the desert prison as soon as possible. 3 hours after they arrived at the prison, a large medical team with various instruments also rushed over at the same time. The doctors had been busy until now. All kinds of instruments showed that Li Tianlan's physical indicators were completely normal, and doctors of traditional Chinese medicine did not find anything abnormal when they felt his pulse, but Li Tianlan was in a coma. It was inexplicable, and everyone could not figure out what was going on. Did Tianlan show any discomfort before? Dongqing Wudi came to Xiao Mahai and asked. No. Xiao Mahai's body shook, and he said with a wry smile, "When we had dinner together, His Highness said that his injury had recovered and he felt very good. But just after dinner, he became like this. His Highness had dinner with us before he fell into a coma, and I also ate. After some leftovers were tested, it proved that there was no toxicity and no poisonous gas was detected in the air. Minister, It's okay." Dongqing Wudi reached out and patted Xiao Mahai on the shoulder. "Don't worry." His voice was very calm. When he said this, he subconsciously glanced at Bai Qingxian beside him. Outside Hanga Pass, when the weapons research base of the Dongchang clan was completely exploded, Bai Qingxian also vomited blood and was in a coma for a while, but there was no problem with the examination. Only a few hours later, Bai Qingxian woke up. Dongqing Wudi felt that Li Tianlan's current situation should be the same as Bai Qingxian's, but he did not know why he was in a coma for so long. "Do you want to go back to Yuzhou?" Bai Qingxian pulled Dongqing Wudi's hand and asked in a low voice. On this day, the whole Zhongzhou state was a little chaotic. The news that President Li Huaqing suddenly fell into a coma when he met Yi Dongsheng had spread in a small circle. At present, it was said that Yi Dongsheng had been closely monitored. At such a sensitive time, Dongqing Wudi, as the standing minister of the army headquarters, was the most appropriate person to be in charge of Yuzhou. It was inevitable that he would be criticized if he came to the desert prison at this time. "It's okay." Dongqing Wudi shook his head. "The situation will not be chaotic. Don't worry." Bai Qingxian nodded and looked at Li Tianlan in the room with some concern and worry. In her sight, Li Tianlan's body lying on the bed suddenly moved. Then he sat up all of a sudden. The helicopter landed slowly less than 60 kilometers away from the prison. The wind and sand all over the sky roared and surged in the desert. In the long distance, the desert prison was only a vague outline in Xian Xuanzi's eyes. Xian Xuanzi got off the plane and stared in the direction of the prison, silent like a statue. "Master, what's here?" The pilot followed him off the plane and asked in confusion. "There's sand here." Xian Xuanzi smiled and looked into the distance. The desert prison appeared and said softly, "This is the place." The pilot blinked and was a little puzzled. Xian Xuanzi glanced at him and said with a smile, "Master, sorry to trouble you. I just want to come here. Now I'm here. You can go back." The pilot took a serious look at Xian Xuanzi and asked again, "What about you, master?" "Don't worry about me." Xian Xuanzi smiled and shook his head. "Goodbye." The pilot hesitated and nodded. He got on a helicopter and glanced at Xian Xuanzi again. Xian Xuanzi smiled and waved his hand. The helicopter slowly rose into the air and gradually went away. Xian Xuanzi sat down facing the desert prison. He took out the earthen jar that contained the fate of the world and carefully placed it on the ground. The wind and sand in the desert gradually quieted down, like a dragon that shows its head but never its tail. In that case, it's better to never see it again. Xian Xuanzi whispered to himself. His eyes became dark, and the countless chaotic secrets of heaven and karma last night seemed to appear in his eyes again. Thousands of karma and countless luck rose and fell, intertwined, collided, and were in chaos. From the moment he opened his eyes, he already knew what he was going to do. Xian Xuanzi looked at the flower in front of him and suddenly laughed. He took out a small knife, reached out and cut his finger, sprinkled the blood on the flower, and whispered, "Flowers bloom." Countless wind and sand spread out in all directions with Xian Xuanzi as the center. The fate of the world, which looked extremely weak and delicate and could not withstand the dryness of the desert and the sun, kept trembling. It grew bigger and bloomed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Xian Xuanzi watched this scene quietly. His white hair was burning crazily, becoming shorter and shorter. The air gradually twisted. There seemed to be an invisible flame burning. There was no fire, but it was extremely hot. Xian Xuanzi looked at the flowers in front of him and laughed. Oh, away. It was not until this moment that he vaguely understood that there might be destiny in this time, but neither heaven nor fate could be defied. He and Wu Wei had disturbed too many destinies, plus some other reasons, which led to the disorder of karma last night. He wanted peace. There was destiny in this world, but there was no need for the so-called guru. The fate of the world kept blooming in front of him. A patch of green appeared in the desert, and a large number of flowers kept blooming. Xian Xuanzi's whole body seemed to be burning in an invisible flame. Before his consciousness returned to the darkness, he closed his eyes and whispered, "Flowers fade." The setting sun of the dusk completely fell. At the moment when day and night alternated, a large number of flowers quickly withered. The wind blew in the desert at night. The wind and sand were rolling and whistling. The fate of the world had disappeared. The flowers completely withered. Everything returned to silence. Xian Xuanzi, flowers, green grass, all disappeared, and there was no trace of their existence. At this moment, Li Tianlan opened his eyes. Li Huacheng raised his palm. Li Kuang-tu, who was still in Tiannan, found the white mist in the meditation room. On Mount Dibbing, countless white mist from the south poured into Li Dongqing's body. Similarly, countless white mist floated out and rushed to the desert. The dragon moved its head, but not its tail. They would never see each other if they were not supposed to. In the desert and on Mount Dibbing, the two people who carried the dragon vein seemed to be completely intertwined. The fate of the world, flowers bloomed and fell. At this moment, there was no dragon tail, no dragon head. Both of them carried the complete dragon vein, but they were different dragon veins. Li Dongcheng slowly lowered his head. "Are you really summer solstice?" He didn't know summer solstice, or he had never seen summer solstice in person. He knew summer solstice, but what he saw before was the tombstone and the portrait. "Your name is Li Dongcheng?" Summer solstice endured the pain in her body, and her face became paler. She had never seen Li Dongcheng. Li Dongcheng didn't answer. He just looked at Beihai in the distance and took a deep breath. At this moment, he finally understood why he couldn't contact the people of the Sword Dynasty in Beihai, and finally understood why no one greeted him at the airport. Too many inconceivable doubts turned into a faint surprise. He laughed. "Why am I here?" Summer Solstice took a deep breath. The sword god of the Sword Dynasty in front of her might only be inconceivable, but in her heart there was only horror. Like the stormy waves on the surface of Beihai in a storm, the huge shock and disbelief constantly impacted her cognition. Li Dongqing stood in front of her, real and not fake. Mount Dibbing was split in half by a sword. Summer Solstice couldn't explain this power. She had never thought that someone could be so powerful. Li Dongcheng glanced at her. There was some eagerness in his eyes. He didn't know why he came here, but he knew that he might be able to see the person he met. Li Dongcheng waved his hand. The white mist surged. Azura and Dongcheng instantly crossed Mount Dibbing and appeared in front of him. Li Dongcheng glanced at Summer Solstice. "If you're Summer Solstice, then Wang Tianzong should also be here." His voice was indifferent and cold. "No matter where he is, ask him to come back. I will take his head before dawn." In the hazy mist, Li Dongqing walked in. The three disappeared instantly. A gust of wind blew over Mount Dibbing. Snowflakes fluttered, and the air was bone-chilling. The white mist was mighty, covering the surface of Beihai from the stage, a formidable person instantly. Dong Chung heard the sound of waves. The sound of water went away, getting farther and farther. Her feet stepped on the ground, and she looked at the picture in front of her. "Where is this?" "Liaodong Provincial Government," Li Dongcheng said. The figure hidden in the white mist directly walked in, and the next second, he had already appeared in the speaker's office. He reached out his hand. Before he knocked on the door was opened. The speaker, who was in a hurry to go out, walked out of the office. The moment he saw Li Dongcheng, he blinked, and his face suddenly changed. Then he showed a humble smile. "Your Majesty," Li Dongqing's heart suddenly sank. "You know me." He took a deep breath and said slowly. Without waiting for the other party to answer, he had directly turned around. The white mist was faintly discernible. Azura and Dongcheng were wrapped in the white mist without any power to resist, and they crazily moved forward. Vaguely, Dongcheng saw the snow mountain. The snow-white scene flashed away. The sea was already under their feet, and the waves were instantly far away. The road was crazily retreating, and the night view of the city and the desolation of the parish were constantly flashing. Dong Chung didn't know how long it had been. The night seemed to be still, but it also seemed to be late at night. Li Dongcheng stopped. A somewhat dilapidated ancestral hall appeared in front of the two. Dongcheng didn't ask where it was. She knew very well where it was. Luo Jing, Zhongyuan, the ancestral hall of the Dongcheng clan. Li Dongqing's eyes became more and more indifferent. He was so familiar with all of this. But this was not what he wanted to see. The ancestral hall was instantly left behind. The highway, the mountain, and the lake all retreated. Dongcheng grabbed Li Dongqing's sleeve in a daze. The wind blew through the white mist. In front of them was already a desert. The prison was lit. Li Dongcheng walked out of the white weapon. The harsh alarm sounded in an instant. Dongcheng didn't react at all. The sky, full of lasers and artillery fire, had directly covered every corner of the surrounding dozens of kilometers. Azura's expression changed dramatically. Such violent artillery fire. Even if he was a super master who was about to break through the peak of the invincible realm, he couldn't bear it. Get out of here! Li Dongqing took a step forward, and in an instant, a vast sword aura suddenly burst out like an ocean. The surging sword light almost lifted the entire desert, and the powerful sword will tore the surface of the earth, penetrating deep into the ground. In a violent explosion, the two military bases located underground in the desert prison suddenly exploded, and the entire desert was shaking. The violent sound had already alerted the warden of the desert prison. Countless guards and wardens rushed out. The moment they saw Li Dongcheng, their faces changed dramatically, and they knelt down directly. Li Dongqing's expression was expressionless. He looked at the crowd kneeling in front of him and asked, "Do you know me too?" "Your Majesty, this I don't know." The warden was trembling all over and was already incoherent. "Why do you want to know me? Why? Why do you know me?" Li Dongcheng suddenly raised his eyebrows. The sword Qi, which was as powerful as a mountain and as mighty as a tsunami, suddenly rushed out in his extreme rage. The warden, the guards, and the entire prison directly turned into pieces the moment they came into contact with the sword energy. The prison that held countless prisoners turned into ruins, and everything around it became a dead zone. Li Dongcheng narrowed his eyes, and his aura became more and more crazy. "Dongcheng, what's wrong?" Dongcheng's face was pale. She rarely saw Li Dongcheng in this state, or even never saw him like this. Li Dongcheng was silent for a long time. His voice seemed to be squeezed out from his teeth. "We are back." It was like he didn't know why he went back. He didn't know why they came back. But he still had too many people he hadn't seen. Too many people he wanted to kill were not killed. Li Dongcheng closed his eyes and whispered, "I want to see them, even if it's just a glance." Chapter 747. The dark world was incomparably empty. The mottled light seemed to be swallowed up little by little. The sound was disappearing. Everything in his sight became hazy. The extreme darkness covered all senses. He stood in the darkness, not knowing how long he had been standing there. Like a dream, like an illusion. It was the same as when he had entered the narrow passageway in the prison a few years ago. Dead silence. Darkness. But the surroundings were no longer dull. He walked quietly in the boundless darkness. His consciousness seemed to be awake, but he was in a trance. He couldn't judge his state, and he didn't even know where he was. In the absolute silence, there was no sound, no enemy, no sword. In the desolate environment, only he walked silently. There was darkness in front of him, and the road was so long that it seemed to have no end. Countless times of madness and despair had given him the strongest will. His mind was as calm as a rock. He just walked forward step by step toward the unknown that he could not see. Time seemed to have lost its meaning. His consciousness between sobriety and trance was so calm that he almost had no desire. He still remembered who he was, but he didn't know where he was going. There was wind in the boundless silence. He kept walking in the direction of the wind, neither fast nor slow, neither arrogant nor impatient. The darkness was still there. He didn't know how long he had walked. It seemed like an hour or a year. Finally, he heard a voice in his ears. The voice was thin and anxious and kept ringing in his ears. He seemed to hear it clearly, but he couldn't understand the meaning of those voices. It was just like in a dream. Everything that was reasonable and illogical appeared in the dream as if it was a matter of course. He kept moving forward. His palms seemed to touch a door in the darkness. In the darkness, he frowned and pushed the door open. There was a cry of surprise behind him. There was a voice in front of him, and it seemed to be calling his name. Tianlan, Your Highness? What do you think? The voice was close and far, as if echoing in the whole dark world. He frowned and kept moving forward in the direction of the voice. The smooth road seemed to disappear. The ground beneath his feet became soft, as if he was stepping on thick yellow sand. Those voices also disappeared, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of light in the boundless darkness. A faint light with a hint of white appeared in the distant darkness. It was extremely eye-catching. He quickened his pace and walked towards the pale white dot. The white fluttered in front of him, getting closer and closer to him. Rich life force gathered in the white light. More and more white, ethereal and illusory, like the morning fog in winter, hazy and cold. He walked into the white mist. All the mist kept rushing into his body. Tiny sounds rang out incessantly, densely packed together. Like the wind blowing through the yellow sand, like the blooming and withering of flowers. The boundless mist kept surging towards his body. The whiteness increased, and it became brighter and brighter. For the first time, the distant sky lit up with true light. It was like the first ray of light in a world of darkness. Rays of light shone high in the sky, like bright stars tearing through the night sky. The light was moving. The stars continued to advance. Regardless of everything, the light that illuminated the boundless darkness eventually turned into a sword light. Cold, fierce, crazy, and decisive. The sword light illuminated the darkness and instantly became the only source of light in the darkness. Li Tianlan looked at the sword light quietly. He finally remembered when he had seen this scene. It was a video he had seen countless times. This was the eternal sword that crossed the sky above Mormons in the chaos of Eastern Europe. This was the most profound picture he had imprinted in his mind. But at this moment, this sword was no longer mighty. Only the incomparably clear artistic conception was constantly moving forward. This was indeed a sword light, but there was only sword intent, without the slightest sword energy. Li Tianlan stood quietly and raised his head. His sword intent was getting faster and faster, getting closer and closer. With the white mist all over the sky, the bright sword light approached his body almost in the blink of an eye. Boom! The frenzied sword intent completely enveloped him. Countless white mists disappeared. Li Tianlan's body suddenly shook violently, and his face turned pale. The sword intent that completely crashed into his arms instantly set off a chaotic storm in his body. At this moment, he could clearly feel that there were a large number of dense scars inside his body. Vaguely, he seemed to be able to feel a weak and almost completely disappeared heartbeat beating with his heart. The feeling was indescribable, as if it was extremely warm. A large expanse of mist appeared around him, constantly healing the injuries in his body. The frenzied sword intent kept whistling in his body. The vitality contained in the dragon vein surged wildly in his body. For the first time, Li Tianlan felt the existence of the dragon vein. The majestic vitality was like an ocean, vast and endless, constantly turbulent. The sharp pain spread in Li Tianlan's body. The sword light that rushed into his body from nothingness became more and more unbridled, crazily destroying his body. The ocean-like dragon vein was completely rioting. A large amount of vitality nourished every muscle and blood vessel in his body. The aggravated injuries were repaired, then aggravated again, and then repaired again. Li Tianlan's consciousness became clearer and clearer. He could feel the massive vitality surging in his body, violent like fire. He could also feel the sword light that came out of nowhere, tearing all the organs in his body. It was as cold as ice. His body was hot and cold at the same time. The injuries caused by the sword energy in his body continued to be healed, and the dragon vein's repair work continued. The extremely weak heartbeat that seemed like it would stop beating at any time was gradually stabilizing. For some reason, Li Tianlan suddenly felt a little happy in his heart, even though the sword light had been wreaking havoc in his body. But the dragon vein in his body became more vivid sooner or later. Or rather, it was complete. The vitality that he carried seemed to suddenly become complete and a part of his body. He could even completely use this unimaginably vast vitality. That faint, illusory heartbeat was still beating in sync with his heart. The dragon vein that suddenly became complete was like a vast ocean, becoming more and more vivid, and the sword light that illuminated the darkness was like a bridge. The bridge was connected to the dragon vein. A part of the vitality of the dragon vein was continuously transmitted from Li Tianlan along the bridge. Li Tianlan could even feel the other party's heartbeat. As the carrier of the dragon vein, he also bore part of the other party's injuries. The other party seemed to be seriously injured. The dense internal injuries were transmitted along the bridge like sword light. A large amount of vitality was transmitted along the bridge, forming a new balance. The dragon vein was sharing, and the injuries were being transferred. Li Tianlan felt that he should be a little annoyed, but when he felt the weak heartbeat, his emotions were only joy and peace. This feeling reminded him of the Sky Academy a few years ago. The early spring sun shone in through the window. For the first time, he stood in the dormitory of the Sky Academy. Behind him was the sea bathed in sunlight. Qin Weibai, with a delicate fragrance, snuggled up to him and took the first photo of the two of them. Li Tianlan closed his eyes and laughed. The heartbeat continued to beat and gradually stabilized. It seemed that there was really someone sharing the dragon vein with him. There was only one person. The ocean-like vitality in his body was constantly surging, far more intense than before. The endless vitality suppressed the injuries, and his body gradually calmed down. Li Tianlan closed his eyes. A pale white light grew brighter and brighter, gradually turning into a pale gold. He opened his eyes. The whole world was already golden. The rising sun emitted a clear and cold light, shining on the thousands of miles of yellow sand beneath his feet. The refracted light shone with a myriad of colors. He stood in the desert, motionless like an eternal silhouette. The last bit of white fog was absorbed by his body. The ocean-like vitality in his body clearly existed, and it was completely complete. Traces of injuries spread in his body and were repaired by the dragon vein. A new balance was formed between destruction and repair. Li Tianlan raised his palm and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, lost in thought. The faint heartbeat was still resonating with his. He could feel the other party's emotions, just like him now, calm and happy. He suddenly missed Qin Weibai. He also wanted to know who was sharing the dragon vein with him. Li Tianlan slowly turned around. In his sight, Bai Qingqian was standing not far behind him and looking at him. Seeing him turn around, Bai Qingqian subconsciously took a step forward, her eyes a little uneasy. Behind Bai Qingqian was Xiao Mahai. Under the yellow sand, there were only two people here. Li Tianlan opened his mouth. The roaring dragon vein in his body seemed to be completely complete, and his emotions and feelings seemed to have become more sensitive than before. Feeling Bai Qingqian's gaze, his heart suddenly beat a few times. His heart skipped a beat. He wanted to call Secretary Bai, but when the words came to his mouth, he called her Annie instead. Ah! Bai Qingqian nodded, trotted over, and whispered, Tianlan, are you okay? I'm fine. Li Tianlan shook his head and looked around. There was only yellow sand around. The outline of the desert prison could be faintly seen in the distance. He frowned and whispered, Why am I here? Bai Qingqian hesitated and glanced at Xiao Mahai. Xiao Mahai shook his head with a wry smile. Your Highness, you suddenly fell into a coma the day before yesterday. The minister and secretary brought a medical team, but they couldn't find out why you fell into a coma. Yesterday evening, you suddenly woke up, but it seemed that you didn't know anyone, and it seemed that you didn't wake up. Then you walked out of the prison by yourself, came here, and stood here all night." He hesitated, glanced at Li Tianlan, and whispered, "I asked the doctor. The doctor said that you have been under too much pressure recently, so you have sleepwalking symptoms. This may also have something to do with your coma. The doctor said that you are very healthy, but he suggested that you rest more at ordinary times and don't put too much pressure on yourself." "Too much pressure? Sleepwalking? Rest more?" Li Tianlan blinked blankly. He didn't know what Xiao Mahai was talking about. He didn't think he was sleepwalking. The faint heartbeat was still resonating with his. He shook his head hard, looked at Bai Qingqian, and whispered, "Auntie, where is the minister?" Bai Qingqian's expression changed slightly, and she seemed to remember something. "He went back overnight for an urgent matter. He should have a meeting in Yuzhou." Li Tianlan was a little curious. What happened? What could make Dongsheng Wudi rush back to Yuzhou from the desert overnight? What could happen in Zhongzhou State now? "It's about Beihai," Bai Qingqian whispered. "It is said that Beihai was attacked by a mysterious expert yesterday. Summer Solstice was seriously injured, and Mount Dibbing suffered heavy losses." Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed. Mysterious expert? Although Mount Dibbing now lacked high-end combat power, it was not easy to break through. He did go up Mount Dibbing, but that was when Dongsheng Wudi took away the internal security forces and Heaven Punishment Troop. Mount Dibbing lacked manpower, and a large number of weapons were unmanned, so it seemed easy. In fact, if the internal security forces and Heaven Punishment Troop were both there, even if he had Xin Yuan's sword in his hand, it was destined to be a hard fight to go up the mountain. The internal security forces might not be scary, but the elite level of Heaven Punishment Troop and the countless weapons on Mount Dibbing were not to be trifled with. And Summer Solstice was seriously injured? Given her physical condition, how could she be seriously injured? "Is there a video?" he asked suddenly. "I'll inform Wudi to send a copy." Bai Qingqian took out her mobile phone. Li Tianlan nodded, glanced at Xiao Mahai, and said, "Computer, I'll arrange a car to take your highness back right away." Li Tianlan looked at the blurred desert prison in the distance and suddenly thought of something. No need. He thought of something and took a step forward. The hazy fog spread out, and the three of them disappeared from where they were. When they reappeared, they were already 100 meters away. Wisps of mist permeated the corridor of the desert prison. Li Tianlan slowly walked out of the fog. Xiao Mahai, who had been in a state of sluggishness, suddenly came to his senses. Looking at the familiar dormitory door, he shook his head in confusion and finally raised his hand to look at his watch. It was at least 50 kilometers away, nearly half an hour, with two people. Xiao Mahai's head shook. He didn't know how Li Tianlan did it, and what the hell was that fog? Li Tianlan pushed the door open and entered Xiao Mahai's dormitory. The computer in the dormitory was on. A video waiting to be received had been sent over. Li Tianlan walked to the computer and clicked accept. The speed of file transmission was extremely fast. In the desert prison, where there were no additional entertainment facilities, the internet became the most important entertainment facility in Xiao Mahai's daily life. Therefore, in the dormitory, he completely used the military network, and the computer was also the best configuration. When he moved into the dormitory for the first time, he scanned through Lieutenant General Xiao Mahai's computer nearly 800 adult movies, more than 40 online games, and nearly a terabyte of undownloaded torrents. It could be seen how serious the degradation of soldiers was in such a remote place. The file transmission was extremely fast. Li Tianlan sat in front of the computer, and Xiao Mahai had taken the initiative to pour a cup of tea for Li Tianlan. The extremely beautiful greenery near Mount Dibbing in Beihai appeared in the video. Li Tianlan silently clicked on the full-screen mode, thinking about how strong the so-called mysterious expert who attacked Beihai was. It is said that there are 3 attackers, 2 men and 1 woman. This video has been included in the confidential document and will be automatically destroyed after watching it, Bai Qingqian said softly. Bai Qingqian said softly. As the speaker of Liaodong, She was very likely to enter the parliament of Zhongzhou State. Last night, she had received the notice that the whole Zhongzhou State seemed to be facing a formidable enemy because of the attacker. Bai Qingqian was very curious about what kind of attacker could make Zhongzhou State so nervous. Li Tianlan nodded and stared at the screen without speaking. There were tens of thousands of monitors on Mount Dibbing, which was enough to monitor every corner of Mount Dibbing at any time and anywhere. The automatic weapon system also had the function of search and identification. Even if Mount Dibbing was attacked, how heavy the loss would be. The angle of the video surveillance was facing the mountain road. A pure black Rolls-Royce appeared on the screen. Li Tianlan slightly raised his eyebrows. The Rolls-Royce in the video had a foreign license plate. The Rolls-Royce stopped in front of the mountain road. A young man with almost perfect appearance and figure got out of the car and looked at Mount Dibbing. The mixed-race bodyguard and the woman with extremely cold temperament followed him and seemed to be talking about something. Li Tianlan frowned and looked at the screen seriously. He had never seen the mixed-race bodyguard in the video, but he always felt that the leading young man was inexplicably familiar. Even the woman standing next to him felt a little familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen her. The video was silent. He seemed to see the young man sneer and say something to the whole Mount Dibbing. Countless guards in the whole Mount Dibbing moved. The young man, who didn't want to wait at all, took a step forward and raised his palm. The whole video suddenly shook completely, as if the whole Mount Dibbing was shaking. Countless fallen leaves flew wildly among the mountains. Some blurred sword light covered every corner of Mount Dibbing in the blink of an eye. The picture in the video went out for a moment and lit up again. It seemed that the camera was directly destroyed. Next was the picture taken by the next camera. The picture on the screen kept flickering, went out, and lit up again. One by one, the cameras were completely destroyed. The falling leaves flying all over the sky almost filled the whole screen. Li Tianlan couldn't see anything except the falling leaves. The earth kept shaking in the silent video. The weapon system on Mount Dibbing seemed to be firing, but all the light was blocked by the falling leaves. The firepower was directly suppressed by the most powerful posture in an instant. Blood occasionally flowed on the screen that went out and lit up again. It seemed that the guards near the camera had died in the falling leaves. The whole Mount Dibbing kept shaking, and all the weapons seemed to be completely shattered. The falling leaves that filled the whole screen rushed all the way from the foot of the mountain to the top of the mountain, covering the sky and the sun. Mount Dibbing, with flowers and forests, instantly turned into a white land in the falling leaves. The blurred sword light flew horizontally and vertically and rushed to the top of the mountain. The whole Mount Dibbing was like a huge piece of tofu that was split open by a sword. The laboratories hidden in the belly of the mountain exploded one after another. The pavilions that had been rebuilt on the top of the mountain were completely shattered. The falling leaves kept flying, but the picture was completely dark. The last camera was destroyed. Vaguely, the falling leaf seemed to rush in the direction of the stage of formidable person. Li Tianlan squinted and thought. From the video, he couldn't see much about this sword. He could only see that this sword was very strong, but he couldn't tell how strong it was. The progress bar was pulled to the end. A picture appeared on the screen. Two bare peaks appeared on the screen. The distance between the peaks was very close, but there was a cliff dozens of meters wide and more than a kilometer deep in the middle. Where is this? Li Tianlan asked inexplicably. This is... Bai Qingqian hesitated. This is Mount Dibbing. Li Tianlan's pupils suddenly contracted for a moment. He turned his head and stared at the picture on the screen. How did Mount Dibbing become like this? The two bare peaks stood quietly. Li Tianlan looked at the cliff. The cliff, which was thousands of meters deep, was extremely smooth. The whole process was completed in one go without any hindrance. He thought about the scale of Mount Dibbing seriously. It was the largest and highest peak of the Wang family of Beihai. It was 2,000 meters above sea level and covered an area of nearly 100,000 square meters. From the foot of the mountain to the top, Li Tianlan suddenly fell silent. At this moment, his heart suddenly became extremely cold. At this moment, he vaguely realized what kind of sword move it was. Someone stood at the foot of Mount Dibbing and made a sword move at a distance of tens of thousands of meters. The sword light swept across heaven and earth, swept everything within a radius of tens of thousands of meters, and destroyed all the weapon systems on Mount Dibbing. The mighty sword light instantly tore apart the 2,000-meter-high peak. It directly hurt summer solstice at the other end of tens of thousands of meters away. Ridiculous? Li Tianlan thought it was really ridiculous. But everything in the video had already proven this point. This sword move, Li Tianlan's face was cloudy. Is this really a sword move? Xiao Mahai's voice trembled a little, and his face was pale. As an expert of the thunder-shocking realm, he almost didn't dare to think about what this sword move represented. This sword move is very powerful. Bai Qingxian said. It's more than powerful. Li Tianlan smiled bitterly. If I'm right, no one in the dark world can do this. What about Wang Tianzong? Bai Qingxian asked. The whole world knew that Wang Tianzong had completely broken through the invincible realm in Eastern Europe and entered a new level. That realm represented the ruling power of the Chosen One in this era. Li Tianlan was silent for a while. His sword intent had long been flawless. Therefore, he could clearly see the end of martial arts. Because of this, no one in the world knew better than him what this sword move meant. He should be able to do it, but he won't be as skillful as the man in the video. He just raised his hand, Li Tianlan said slowly. At least he couldn't have done it so easily at that time. If he hadn't been injured in Eastern Europe and given a few years to let him reach the real peak, Wang Tianzong should have been able to do it. The Chosen One? Xiao Mahai's voice trembled a little. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and said softly, more than that. This is the Chosen One in the peak state, the one who has really reached the end of martial arts. That state, for most of the current martial artists, even for the experts of the invincible realm, is equivalent to God. He is invincible and irresistible. Who is he? Bai Qingxian suddenly asked. Li Tianlan smiled bitterly. How could he know? It was impossible for such a person to exist in the current dark world, or in other words, the situation of his existence was not right. Based on the strength of the sword move shown by the other party in the video, not to mention the current dark world, even the invincible realm experts of the divine and holy lists could not do anything to him. Standing at that level, the invincible realm was also a nonentity. That was the Real Supreme. In Li Tianlan's view, the only thing that could threaten such a person's life and death was the eternal sword in Eastern Europe, or Wang Tianzong, who had completely stabilized his realm after recovering from his injury. If there was such a person, how could the current dark world be in chaos? All the superpowers could only crawl in front of him. When individual strength reached that level, he didn't even need any forces. He alone was enough to sweep and even completely rule the entire dark world. Such a person should not exist. But he did exist. He was in the video, and he went to Beihai yesterday and directly destroyed Mount Dibbing with one sword move. That was what puzzled Li Tianlan. If the other party really had a grudge against the Wang family of Beihai, how could Summer Solstice just be seriously injured? And if there was really such a person who had a grudge against the Wang family of Beihai, how could the Wang family of Beihai exist until now? Li Tianlan pulled back the progress bar of the video. The Rolls-Royce appeared in the video, and he couldn't tell which country's license plate it was. Then the young man got out of the car. Li Tianlan pressed the pause button. Bai Qingxian suddenly let out a sound of surprise. What's wrong? Li Tianlan's heart moved. I don't know. Bai Qingxian shook her head and frowned slightly. She whispered, I just feel that this person is a little familiar, and this girl is also very familiar. Li Tianlan's heart shook. He looked at the young man's face carefully. That kind of eyebrows, that kind of perfection, that kind of temperament. Ethereal and dreamy. He seemed to see the shadow of Qin Weibai in the young man, but not completely. There was also a strange sense of familiarity. He couldn't think of it for a while. His hand inadvertently pressed the play button. The overwhelming sword swept through the entire Mount Dibbing in a neat and tidy manner. One sword covered the sky. Li Tianlan played the video 4 or 5 times in a row. The familiar feeling in his heart became clearer, but he still had no clue. A communication window suddenly popped up on the computer. Xiao Mahai, who had been watching the video and suppressed his inner fear, even regarded the video as a special effects movie, was shocked. He subconsciously wanted to stand up and salute, but as soon as he stood up, he suddenly sat back down and said awkwardly, "Your Highness, this is the communication system of the army headquarters." Li Tianlan frowned and pressed the answer button. Dongqing Wudi's extremely solemn expression appeared on the screen. Seeing Li Tianlan, his face seemed to ease, and he whispered, "Tianlan, how are you? Are you feeling uncomfortable?" "I'm fine." Li Tianlan didn't seem to expect that Dongqing Wudi's first question was about his body. He shook his head in surprise and took the initiative to say, "I'm watching the video of Mount Dibbing. How do you feel?" Dongqing Wudi's expression suddenly became solemn. "Tell me your opinion. If there is really an invincible realm, it is probably at this level," Li Tianlan said calmly. The sword in Mount Dibbing kept replaying in his mind. That kind of strength and that level was what he had been pursuing all along. One person defeated the whole world. Compared with Wang Tianzong in Eastern Europe? Dongqing Wudi asked. If Wang Tianzong was not injured in Eastern Europe, he should be the only one who can fight with him now, but he should be a little worse. Unless Wang Tianzong stabilizes his current realm, he can be on par with him, Li Tianlan said slowly. Dongqing Wudi frowned tightly and was silent for a long time. How could there be such a person? After a long time, he finally opened his mouth and muttered to himself. "The question is why there has been no news about such a person before." Li Tianlan suddenly said, "What's the attitude of the parliament? We just had a meeting to discuss it. At present, Kunlun City is already investigating this matter. It happened too recently, and there are not too many clues for the time being." Dongqing Wudi shook his head and sighed softly. The sword in Mount Dibbing could be said to be really destructive. Moreover, the sword started at the foot of the mountain. Not only did it seriously injure Summer Solstice, but it also destroyed a small warship on Beihai. This sword brought an unprecedented impact to the parliament of Zhongzhou State. If a person could be so powerful, it completely meant that he could directly fight against all regimes alone. Now the video has spread all over the dark world. All the major countries have received the news and are also secretly investigating. If such a person exists, it will be a huge threat to any country. However, there is still too little information available at the moment. That car, Li Tianlan reminded. The license plate number in the video was obvious, which was undoubtedly a clue. The car was left at the foot of Mount Dibbing. The license plate is a Swiss license plate. But after we communicated with the Swiss side said that they had not issued this license plate at all. After that, we contacted the Rolls-Royce headquarters, and they also said that they had not made this car at all. But this car did use Rolls-Royce's technology. What else? Li Tianlan asked. There's also an Airbus private plane. Dongqing Wudi said, that plane is parked at the airport, but all the stewardesses and captains have disappeared. We contacted Airbus. He suddenly hesitated, and his eyes drifted. The other party said that they had not made this plane? Li Tianlan asked. No, the other party said that this plane is very similar to the next generation of Airbus private planes they plan to develop. But at present, they only put forward the plan and have just invested in the research and development. Now what they see can be said to be the finished product. What's going on? Airbus is also asking us. They even suspect that Zhongzhou State has stolen their technology. Damn it. Li Tianlan was speechless for a moment and asked, that is to say, this plane should not exist at all? It should not exist now. Airbus hasn't developed it yet. God knows how this plane came to be. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. The parliament has not come to a clear conclusion, but we all agree that it is impossible for such a person to exist without any clues, and it is impossible that no one has heard of it. Some of us are analyzing their lip language, and since they exist, I think they will appear again in the future. Not even the slightest clue? Li Tianlan's heart slightly moved, and he suddenly said, I have heard of a similar person who is also invincible in the world. But at present, there seems to be no trace of his existence in the whole dark world. Who? Dongxing Wudi asked. Dongxing Huang too. Li Tianlan looked at Dongxing Wudi deeply. Who is he? Bai Qingqian's palm trembled slightly, and she almost knocked over the teacup. She looked at Li Tianlan with a strange look in her eyes. Dongxing Huang too. Invincible in the world. Chapter 748. Italy, Seven Hill City. The dim sky obscured the setting sun, and the bustling city gradually lit up. Under the shining lights, the 6th Street of Seven Hill City became more and more deserted, and the wide road seemed extremely empty. Although the 6th Street belonged to Seven Hill City, it had a special name for Dallos. Welcome Avenue. This was the country of Italy. However, the 6th Street was not the Welcome Avenue of Seven Hill City, but the Welcome Avenue of the Sacred City. In the past many years, when politicians, leaders of wealthy families, and other important missions visited the Sacred City, they all entered the Sacred City directly from the 6th Street, and then left from the 6th Street. Therefore, in the eyes of many believers of the Vatican, the 6th Street of Seven Hill City was also known as the Road of Holy Light, a place paved with the glory of the Lord. His Majesty, dressed in black, had been standing on the street of the 6th Street for a long time. He stood there quietly and looked up at the sky seriously. The sun rose and the moon set, and night fell again. His figure looked like a statue in the lights at night. Mellad quietly followed him. His Majesty didn't move, and he didn't move either. On weekdays, the people who came and went in the 6th Street were basically believers of the Vatican, and their status was not low. At least, they would not be so low that even Mellad, the deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps, did not know them. Seeing Mellad standing here with a man in black, everyone took a detour. As time went by, the 6th Street had been secretly blocked, and no one disturbed His Majesty's meditation. Mellad looked up at the sky. The lights shrouded the city. The sky of Seven Hill City looked extremely high, and the stars were sparse. He couldn't see anything. He didn't know what His Majesty was looking at until he had been standing here with His Majesty for a day and a night. The two stood silently and did not speak. Standing on the street, motionless, they were like fools. His Majesty was still calm and collected. Mellad opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but stopped. In the end, he swallowed the words he was about to say and did not disturb His Majesty's train of thought. If he had a train of thought, Mellad was not sure about this. He could clearly feel that His Majesty was thinking about something, but the kind of contemplation he showed was more like being at a loss. Mellad shook his head. Just as he was about to go find some food nearby, His Majesty, who had been standing here for a day and a night, suddenly turned his head and said calmly, "Return to the holy city." Mellad's spirit was shocked. He nodded subconsciously and followed His Majesty's footsteps back. His Majesty's footsteps were a little hurried, and he looked restless. "Your Majesty, what did you see?" Mellad asked cautiously. His Majesty paused, turned to look at him, and slowly said, "I didn't see anything." Mellad let out an. His Majesty had already turned around and continued, "But this is the worst. I have a very bad feeling. It seems that something is going to happen." Intuition? Mellad was a little disapproving. "Don't look down on my intuition. My intuition has always been very accurate. I've had this feeling once, and I don't want to experience it again." His Majesty said lightly, "But nothing has happened yet. Our prospects are very good." Mellad was a little helpless. "Now it seems that the situation is very favorable to us." His Majesty turned around and stretched out a hand to Mellad. Mellad was stunned and watched His Majesty roll up his cuffs. Under the cuffs was a very smooth and white arm that could even make women jealous. His Majesty curled his fingers on his wrist and suddenly pulled it a little. The smooth skin was instantly opened, but there was no blood. His Majesty casually threw the skin on his arm to the ground and slowly said, "This layer of skin is fake. Do you see it, Mellad?" Mellad lowered his head. In his sight, scars appeared one after another on His Majesty's real arm. For a moment, Mellad couldn't describe this arm at all. There were too many dense scars, almost covering every inch of flesh on His Majesty's arm. This seemed to be a new wound, and the large scars looked like they had just scabbed. Lad was a little confused. It's an injury from many years ago. His Majesty rolled up his cuffs again and said blandly, "Back then, I wanted to kill a woman who was completely crazy. She cut me with a sword before she died. Such scars are everywhere on my body. The skin I just tore off is fake, but it's also a very rare medicine that can slowly repair my body. Do you see these scars? The injury from many years ago was barely healed not long ago. At that time, I didn't expect it to be like this. The feeling at that time is the same as now." His Majesty's voice was low. "I feel like I'm going to die." Lad took a deep breath and smiled a little reluctantly. He recalled the scars on His Majesty's arm, those dense sword wounds. How sharp was the sword energy needed to make those wounds heal after so many years? His voice was a little dry. "Your Majesty, I don't think anyone can kill you now. Don't talk nonsense." His Majesty sped up. "Let's go see the Pope." The two of them returned to the Holy City as fast as they could. They passed by the Holy Church. With Lad leading the way, they directly entered the Holy Palace. In the Palace of the Holy Palace, the Pope, who was dressed in a white robe, was admiring a collection of medieval poems under the soft light. Hearing the sound of footsteps, he slowly raised his head and narrowed his eyes. His Majesty looked at him quietly and did not speak. "My friend, your spirit doesn't look very good." The Pope took the initiative to break the silence and smiled gently. "What are you confused about? It's not important." His Majesty said blandly. "I need you to help me once." "Oh." The Pope nodded, reached out to pour a cup of black tea, and said slowly, "Tell me about it. I need you to crown me." His Majesty said in a deep voice. Lad, who was behind His Majesty, opened his mouth wide and looked at His Majesty with a strange look in his eyes. His Majesty's movements were slightly sluggish. He raised his head and said calmly, "Are you kidding? What do you think?" His Majesty asked. The Pope put down the teacup and said slowly, "I can't do it, my friend. Your spirit is very strong. In terms of willpower, you could be said to be one of the most strong-willed people I have ever seen. The coronation comes from the power of the spiritual level. To put it simply, once the coronation is successful, you will be completely concentrated and enter a state similar to hypnosis, which will make your combat effectiveness in all aspects rise to a higher level. But although I am in the transcendent realm, my spirit can't affect you at all. My coronation has no effect on you." "This is not what I want to hear," His Majesty said slowly. "You can't hypnotize me, but you still have a way to make my will more concentrated. Your Majesty the Pope, don't deny it. You can't deceive me in this regard. You don't want to do it because you're not willing to pay the price. Is that right?" The Pope narrowed his eyes. He did not admit it, but he did not deny it either. "What do you want?" His Majesty took the initiative to ask. "What can you give me?" The Pope asked with a smile. This time, His Majesty was silent for a long time. He suddenly waved his hand and said in a low voice, "Lad, go out and guard." Lad was stunned. Without any hesitation, he turned around and went out. Seeing this scene, the Pope narrowed his eyes and focused his attention on His Majesty again. His Majesty took 2 steps forward and sat in front of the Pope. The light in the Pope's eyes flickered constantly, and he looked a little playful. At this moment, he could clearly feel that the mysterious His Majesty's spirit was relaxing. It was constantly relaxing and becoming extremely peaceful. The Pope poured him a cup of tea. "Thank you." His Majesty nodded. After hesitating for a moment, he reached out and took off the human skin on his face. A mask. His eyes were clear and calm. He looked at the Pope's obviously surprised face and laughed. "I can tell you a story." He sat down. In front of the Pope, he closed his eyes and said, "See for yourself." Bang! A small explosion suddenly exploded on the test bench. Flames and frost flashed at the same time. The thick alloy steel plate was almost instantly coated with a thick layer of frost. The moment the frost formed, the raging flames flickered for a moment. The dull burning sound lasted for a second, and the thick alloy immediately turned into a pile of black ashes. But the black ashes were not the remains of the burning. The black dust fluttered and fell to the ground, shining with a layer of extremely strange black-blue light. Obviously, this was a kind of extremely destructive poison. Her pure white palm trembled. Her expression slowly returned to calmness. She took a deep breath and accepted another failure. She walked to another test bench, picked up the communicator, and said calmly, "Soma." "Hello, Dr. Murphy." A soft female voice sounded from the communicator. "Inform the biochemistry department that the 6th experiment has failed. Ask them to come and extract the failed samples for analysis. The data they gave is not accurate. I need to figure out the specific composition of this damn thing. I need the most detailed data." The woman suppressed the anxiety in her heart, but the anger in her tone was still rising subconsciously. "Okay." On the other end of the communicator, Soma's voice was still soft and elegant. The communication was hung up. Dr. Murphy's slender body softly slumped into the chair, lost in thought. From the perspective of Westerners' aesthetics, Dr. Murphy was a standard beauty. Although she was already in her 30s, she did not look as old as Westerners of the same age. Her tall figure was still hot. She was curvy, her skin was white and tender. Her facial features were well-defined, and she did not even have crow's feet at the corners of her eyes. In this mysterious laboratory, the graceful Dr. Murphy could be said to be an extremely eye-catching scenery. The laboratory was silent. After the experiment failed, the pile of black ashes shone with a strange luster, as if it was flickering. Murphy took out a cigarette, lit it, and took a deep puff. There was a touch of helpless pain in her trembling eyes. It had been 7 months since she came here. She could clearly feel that she was haggard. Although she was still doing the work she liked, the seemingly endless darkness in front of her made her extremely desperate. Dr. Murphy Staney Wilson. Internationally, this was not a very prominent name, and very few people had even heard of this name. But in Star State, this was a very important figure. 7 months ago, she was an ordinary researcher in the Star State Biological Laboratory, but the allowance she received was twice that of the chief person in charge of the Star State Biological Laboratory. To some extent, she could be said to be the most core figure in the Star State Biological Laboratory, but she had been secretly protected by the Star State, reducing all exposure. Dr. Murphy was very satisfied with such a life. The allowance given to her by the Star State could ensure that her life was very prosperous. She had a very happy family, a husband who loved her very much, and a lovely daughter. Her life could be said to be truly carefree. But all the good things were completely torn apart that night 7 months ago. A group of mysterious people rushed directly into her home. While she was watching TV with her lover, the mysterious people directly captured her family of 3. The family of 3 was completely knocked out, and when they woke up, they were already here. 7 months. Until now, they did not even know who the enemy was, let alone have access to the slightest news from the outside world. This was a biological laboratory that was not considered advanced in Murphy's opinion. Most of the equipment in it was not comparable to North Sea, which had the most advanced technology in this regard. It was even inferior to the laboratories in Star State. But this laboratory was very functional, and there were good talents in each department. Murphy had come into contact with them through work and was shocked to find that all of them seemed to be researchers who had been kidnapped. Among them, a doctor of chemistry who used to work as a researcher in the German Institute had even stayed here for nearly 6 years. There were different departments in the laboratory, and each department was subdivided into different groups. The people in the groups were responsible for one project after another. Murphy's position was relatively aloof. She was not a member of any group, but she was equipped with 3 assistants. Her task was to study the antidote for a poison, and as a reward, she would have about an hour every 2 months to see her daughter and husband. Life seemed to have completely lost its future and hope. Murphy's only motivation now was for the most precious hour in 2 months. She sat on the chair in a daze, took a deep breath, and held back the tears that seemed to flow at any time. She was extremely disappointed. "It seems that I should consider giving you some more work, dear Dr. Murphy. I don't need useless people here, nor do I need you to be lazy. A flat voice suddenly sounded. The other party's English was standard and fluent, but in Murphy's ears, it was like the whisper of a demon, extremely cold. Murphy's plump body suddenly became alert. She jumped up and stammered, "No, the experiment just failed. I've already informed. That's not a reason. The experiment failed. You should make a record and try to find a new way. Look what I brought to encourage you." The voice thought unhurriedly. The door of the laboratory was opened. A figure shrouded in black appeared in Murphy's sight. There was a little girl who looked a little silly standing beside him. "Jessie." Murphy rushed over excitedly and hugged her daughter. Her heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. The little girl was no more than 6 or 7 years old. Looking at the excited Murphy, she subconsciously took a step back. After a moment of hesitation, she said softly, "Mom." Her voice was dull and a little dull. Murphy hugged her daughter, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't like this. It wasn't like this before. Her family used to be very happy. Her daughter was also very lively and smart. But in just a few months, she wasn't by her daughter's side. God knew what she had experienced to scare her like this. "Okay, I've seen your daughter," then the voice of the man in black rang out. "No." Murphy suddenly screamed, rushed over to hold the man's leg, and begged, "Your Majesty, please, let me stay with my daughter a little longer. 5 minutes, no. 10 minutes, oh no. 7 minutes is enough, please." She looked up at the man in black. The man in black was also looking down at her. There was no emotion in his dark eyes. Murphy's eyes were extremely weak. She didn't know who the person who ordered to kidnap her here was. He had no name, and everyone called him Your Majesty. He rarely came to the lab, but every time he came, everyone's pressure would increase. The two looked at each other silently for a while. A gleam of light flashed across the man's dark pupils. He nodded and said, "Yes. Thank you, Your Majesty." Murphy said in surprise, turned around, and hugged her daughter tightly. She kept taking deep breaths. "Your experiment failed again?" His Majesty asked slowly. He rubbed his eyebrows and said slowly, "I just told a story to someone. I'm very tired and in a very bad mood." Then, "Dear Murphy, tell me some good news to cheer me up. I'm free." Murphy's face was pale, and she said in a trembling voice, "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. Do you have any ideas?" His Majesty asked slowly. "Not yet. This kind of poison contradicts each other and is extremely toxic. I still need a little more time." Following His Majesty, Murphy's body was a little weak, and her heart was full of fear. The two came to the central test bench one after the other. There was a tiny bottle on the test bench. The bottle was completely transparent, shining with the light of flames and ice under the bright light. "Of course I know that his poison is very toxic," His Majesty said blandly. "Do you know that this poison comes from a genius in Zhongzhou's state? It's the poison of extreme cold and the poison of extreme heat. I know more than you, but I don't have the antidote. Murphy, do you have it?" "I don't have it." Murphy's voice trembled more and more. "Oh, you don't have it," His Majesty repeated in a slightly dull voice. He sighed slowly and said, "Murphy, I'm very disappointed." He turned around and looked at the little girl whose hand was held by Murphy. His voice became soft. "How old is she?" Murphy's body suddenly shook, and his voice became soft. He subconsciously wanted to stand in front of the girl. His Majesty chuckled and reached out his hand. There was a breeze in the laboratory. On the broken test bench, a black speck of dust containing highly toxic poison floated up. His Majesty, dressed in black, took out a piece of chocolate and slowly opened it. The black speck of dust fell on the chocolate. His Majesty smiled gently, handed the chocolate to the girl, and said softly, "Eat it, Your Majesty." There was no trace of blood on Murphy's face. She suddenly knelt down and kowtowed frantically to His Majesty, tears streaming down her face. Her forehead touched the hard floor with great force. His Majesty could even feel the floor under his feet shaking. Blood instantly flowed out of Murphy's smooth forehead, mixing with his tears. She looked extremely embarrassed. "Your Majesty, please don't. She's still a child. Please don't. An extremely shrill cry rang out in the laboratory. Bang! His Majesty casually kicked Murphy's head. Her body slid more than 10 meters away and hit the test bench hard, making a dull sound. Mom! The little girl subconsciously turned around and shouted. His Majesty had reached out and grabbed the little girl's hair. Your Majesty, don't. Murphy's head was covered in blood. She desperately crawled toward her daughter. His Majesty's eyes were cold. He pinched the little girl's mouth and put the chocolate directly into her mouth. Murphy was dumbfounded. Her whole body froze in place. After a long time, she let out an extremely shrill scream of despair. Don't worry, His Majesty's voice sounded. This poison has contaminated the alloy. The toxicity has decreased, and the amount is very small. Your daughter won't die, at least for a few months. His voice was soft and clear. Dear Murphy, if you want to save your daughter, you have to work hard. I want the antidote. Do you understand? He smiled and patted the little girl's face. Look, what a lovely child. What an innocent child. I believe you, Murphy. Save her. I beg you, okay? In the soft voice, Murphy lay there in a daze. The blood on her forehead kept flowing down along with her tears, and she couldn't stop it. His Majesty took the girl's hand and walked out. The moment the door closed, the girl stood at the door, looked at her mother lying inside, and said softly, Mom. The target's physical data has stabilized. Most of the data is below the minimum value, but it has stopped declining. Switzerland, Forgotten City. In the biological laboratory, Nayland Shuring stared at the data fed back on the screen and finally breathed a sigh of relief. What does this mean? Lin Fengting asked immediately. This means that the target has escaped from a situation of certain death. We have completed the initial prediction. Now she is not a living person, but she is not dead either. Nayland Shuring's voice was a little tired. Next, she needs to wait. The effect of the war god's body is very good for her. This time, the fusion is almost perfect, but her injuries are too heavy. I need to develop the third generation of eternal life as soon as possible so that she can recover. She paused and continued. As for the next period of time, she can only sleep like this. I don't want it to take a long time. Qin Weibai turned to look at Nayland Shuring. She can't afford to wait, and neither can we. Dr. Nayland, I don't want to threaten you, but the development of eternal life must be accelerated. Otherwise, your Wang family of Beihai may not be able to afford to wait. Nayland Shuring's face darkened for a moment, but she still nodded. She didn't say much to Qin Weibai. She just looked at Lin Fengyue on the side and whispered, I'm going back to Tian'an soon. There are some things I need to communicate with you. I'll come here about once a month. During this period, please take care of her. Okay. Lin Fengyue nodded and stretched out her hand. This way, please. Nayland Shuring nodded and followed Lin Fengyue. Qin Weibai stood behind and quietly looked at Nayland Shuring's back. The light in her eyes became more and more complicated. You shouldn't be too tough. Lin Fengting was silent for a moment and glanced at Qin Weibai. At present, no one can replace Nayland Shuring. I will pay attention to her attitude and give her a warning, but your attitude can be softer. Qin Weibai was silent for a while. She also knew that her attitude was a little aggressive, so she nodded and said, I will try to ease it. She took a deep breath and whispered, Horsewoman. Boss. Horsewoman took a step forward. Haven't you found the person I asked you to find? Qin Weibai's tone was a little tired. No. At present, I have mobilized the intelligence organization of the Lin clan according to your order, but the news we got is that the target has been kidnapped and disappeared 7 months ago. The family of 3 has all disappeared. Their family has chosen to call the police. Star State is very angry about this. The FBI has been investigating some suspects, but so far, there has been no result. Horsewoman shook her head and smiled bitterly. Is that Dr. Murphy really so important? Lin Fengting raised his eyebrows. Qin Weibai had used the intelligence system of the Lin clan to find a researcher named Murphy in Star State. He naturally knew about this, but he had never heard of this name. Maybe she's more important than you think. Qin Weibai whispered, This is the only candidate I can think of who can replace Nayland Shuring. She may be a little worse, but she is relatively the best. Nayland Shuring is not reliable, so we at least need a good enough candidate. Lin Fengting sighed softly and was about to speak. Grunt, grunt, grunt. A series of subtle sounds suddenly rang out. Lin Fengting and Qin Weibai were stunned. Their faces suddenly changed. They turned around at the same time and looked at the huge nutrition chamber behind them. In a nutrition chamber, at this time, countless nutrient solutions were constantly evaporating at a very fast speed. Lin Fengyue, who had just disappeared, suddenly pushed open the door of the small laboratory and rushed out. She said excitedly, "All the data of the injured are recovering, and all the data have broken through the minimum value. Her condition is improving. My God, it's incredible." Really, Puff. As soon as Qin Weibai opened her mouth, a mouthful of blood suddenly gushed out of her mouth without warning. A thin layer of white mist instantly enveloped her body. Her body trembled, and she struggled to say something, but her body softly fell to the ground. Everyone's face changed dramatically. "Boss!" Horsewoman suddenly screamed. Qin Weibai tried to open her eyes. Her eyes were focused, but everything in her sight began to become dark. In the endless darkness, a light was emerging little by little. The corner of her mouth moved. The darkness disappeared completely. A flame completely occupied the dark night, burning crazily in her consciousness, and then disappeared in a flash. Apex. Chapter 749. Qin Weibai snorted softly. Crystal beads of blood flowed down from the corners of her mouth, and an inexplicable pain swept through her whole body. Her face suddenly turned snow white, and her whole body trembled violently. A fine white mist surged out of her body. It was hazy and full of vitality. The white mist appeared and disappeared, quickly absorbed by her. She opened her eyes wide and swayed, but her consciousness became extremely clear. She couldn't even faint if she wanted to. The scene in front of her seemed to have completely returned to normal. She could see the ceiling of the laboratory, and countless high-tech instruments were working. Lin Fengting's face was extremely ugly, and he asked loudly what was going on. Farther away, Lin Fengxue and Nayland Shuring had come out quickly. Some researchers had already rushed over to open an instrument that could detect physical indicators. Horsewoman carefully picked her up and rushed to the instrument. The familiar scene disappeared. Her vision turned pitch black again. A burning flame appeared in the pitch black space. The fire kept rising. The severe pain swept through her whole body like a storm. She couldn't help but groan and clenched her fists tightly. What the hell is going on? Lin Fengting was completely inexplicable. A minute ago, Qin Weibai was fine, and he had never heard of her having any disease or injury. But now, she suddenly became like this. Lin Fengting hated this feeling. In the next 20 years, Qin Weibai would be extremely important to the entire Lin clan. She was now the acting patriarch of the Lin clan. To put it bluntly, her current safety was even more important than Lin Fengting's own. Record her physical data and do a detailed examination immediately. Prepare to activate the number 3 drug and stabilize her condition first. Nayland Shuring said in a hurried tone. Horsewoman carefully held Qin Weibai and put her in the instrument. It was less than 10 meters away, but she had already broken out in a cold sweat. Qin Weibai's body was completely in contact with the instrument. The instrument, which had already started to operate, suddenly lit up a large number of signal lights. A hazy light curtain filled the inside of the instrument, completely enveloping Qin Weibai's body. The white mist around her was still slightly undulating, and the whole picture looked extremely psychedelic. The hazy light curtain kept scanning Qin Weibai's body. Nayland Shuring stood in front of an instrument and operated the screen. Countless data was brushed up like a stream and was quickly recorded. A virtual image of Qin Weibai's physical condition emerged. The image was dynamic, and it was constantly analyzing the situation inside Qin Weibai's body. Nayland Shuring stared at the screen, and her eyes became more and more confused, as if she had encountered something very difficult to understand. What happened? Lin Fengting walked over and asked in a deep voice as he looked at the patterns and data that he couldn't understand. The situation is a bit strange. Nailin Shuring shook her head. What a powerful vitality. What do you mean? Lin Fengting asked. Nailin Shuring hesitated for a moment. Instead of answering directly, she quickly switched the screen. The big screen immediately split into two screens, and two virtual images appeared. The data on the two screens kept alternating. Nailin Shuring watched for a while, and her eyes gradually lit up with disbelief. She said softly, "What the hell is going on? I'm the one asking you." Lin Fengting's tone was a little impatient. Qin Weibai suddenly became like this, which really tested her mentality. At present, according to the data analysis of the instrument, Boss Qin's situation is the same as that of the person inside. Nailin Shuring finally spoke. As she spoke, she pointed to the closed nutrition chamber nearby. What do you mean? Lin Fengting's body shook violently. The same situation? Did Qin Weibai also need the body of the god of war and a long sleep? Lin Fengting's eyes became cold in an instant. He looked at Nailin Shuring and said in a cold voice, "Make it clear. The person inside was so seriously injured because of the 13th floor. But this matter had nothing to do with Qin Weibai. How could their situation be the same? If someone had done something, Nailin Shuring was the most suspicious person among all the people present. Did something happen to the Wang family of Beihai? Lin Fengting's eyes flickered. He could tolerate many things, but if Nailin Shuring really attacked Qin Weibai, he could not tolerate it. The Lin clan could not tolerate it either. Qin Weibai might have many identities, but she was now the patriarch of the Lin clan. Attacking the patriarch of the Lin clan was tantamount to a formal declaration of war. Nailin Shuring's heart beat fiercely. Facing Lin Fengting's cold eyes, she shook her head and said, "You misunderstood me. Boss Qin is fine at present, but her injury is exactly the same as that of the person inside. But compared with the person inside, the damage to her body is very light. They have the same kind of injury, but the severity is different. If you use the value as an example, the severity of the person inside is about 100, while the severity of Boss Qin is about 1. Moreover, there's a very strong vitality in Boss Qin's body, which can probably perfectly offset her injury. The situation just now should be a sudden outburst, and now is being made up by the vitality. Boss Qin will be fine after a short rest." Lin Fengting looked at her quietly. His expression was as if he was listening to a book from heaven. "You said Little Bai is injured?" he asked slowly. Nailin Shuring nodded and said, "Yes." "Ridiculous," Lin Fengting said coldly. "How did she get injured? And it's the same injury as that person. Do you think it's possible? Just a moment ago, she was still fine. This is indeed ridiculous, and this is what I can't understand the most." Nailin Shuring nodded and frowned, as if she didn't know how to phrase it. An exclamation suddenly sounded. Lin Fengyue's excited voice sounded. "Fengting, the patient's physical index has stabilized. It's completely stabilized." Lin Fengting turned around and asked, "Whose index?" "Hers." Lin Fengyue stretched out her hand and pointed to the nutrition pod with an incredulous look on her face. "Don't ask me. I don't know how it's done." In the nutrition pod, the nutrient solution that had been consumed almost in an instant was replenished again. A new set of data appeared on the computer. When Chairman Qin's accident happened, the body's stats were rising, and it wasn't temporary. From the looks of it, the growth of the stats is very stable. If her original state was neither dead nor alive, then from the looks of it now, she's alive, but she's closer to death. How could such a thing happen? We didn't do anything. Is it the body of the god of war? Lin Fengyue kept talking. It has nothing to do with the body of the god of war. "Dr. Lin, you can come have a look at this." Nailin Shuring's voice sounded. Lin Fengyue was stunned and came to Nailin Shuring's instrument. Countless data were still flowing on the instrument. Lin Fengyue's pupils suddenly shrank, and she whispered, "Is this Boss Qin's physical data?" Nailin Shuring nodded. This, Lin Fengyue was dumbfounded. "What? Okay." Lin Fengting suddenly spoke with a gloomy face. Now is not the time for you to discuss with each other. I need to know what is going on. Lin Fengyue glanced at him and frowned, as if she didn't know what to say for a while. I don't know if you can understand. Lin Fengyue said slowly. To put it simply, we regard the palace master's injury as a kind of disease. Now, this disease, we temporarily name it 0. The palace master's disease can be said to be incurable. In terms of values, her disease value has reached 100. Lin Fengting felt that this statement was a bit familiar. And now, Boss Qin is infected with the same disease as the palace master, but her disease is very light, and the value is only 1. The value of 100 is the value of the palace master stabilized by the body of the god of war. But just now, this value suddenly decreased. We are not sure how much it decreased, but the palace master's injury has indeed improved greatly, at least by nearly 1/10. This may be the reason why Boss Qin is in this situation. Lin Fengting's pupils suddenly shrank. You mean that part of the palace master's injury suddenly transferred to Little White, and now they share the palace master's injury? More than that. Lin Fengyue shook her head. At least for now, it seems like Chief Qin is only taking on a small part of the responsibility. Most of the responsibility seems to have suddenly disappeared, or maybe someone else is taking it. I just don't know who it is. Moreover, Boss Qin suddenly has a lot more vitality in her body, and we don't know what is going on. Similarly, we don't know why she can bear the injury with the palace master. Lin Fengting stopped talking. He stood in place and was silent for a long time, with a solemn face. After a long time, he took a deep breath and said slowly, "Stealing heaven." What is stealing heaven? Nailan Shuriying and Lin Fengyue asked at the same time. Lin Fengting shook his head with a wry smile. Stealing heaven was naturally not a scientific thing. It was a word he heard from Lin Su. As the metaphysics grandmaster of the Lin clan, Lin Su's cultivation was not much worse than that of Xian Xuanzi and Great Master Wu Wei. Stealing heaven involved a lot of mysteries of heaven and fate, and it could be said to be the highest achievement in their profession. The general principle was to completely connect 2 or 3 people who were most closely related to fate. When they were together, they condensed infinite vitality into a chain that tied up the fate of several people, so that they could bear the injury together. It sounded mysterious, and it was not easy to do. According to Lin Su, since they wanted to steal heaven and change their fate, then the connection between the fate of several people must be close to a certain extent. At the same time, the so-called chain condensed by vitality must be strong enough. As for the strength, it needed enough vitality. According to him, only the fate of the country contained the strongest vitality. For example, the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State. Even if the dragon vein existed, there was a saying in metaphysics that the dragon's head could not be seen. If someone was the dragon's head, someone must be the dragon's tail. It was difficult for the entire dragon vein to completely gather on one person. If this could not be done, the chain would be unstable and the fate of several people could not be tied up. The dragon vein was the execution tool of stealing heaven, but the foundation was another thing. As for what it was, Lin Su was not very clear. Even if all these could be possessed, the executor was difficult to find. Without enough understanding of the mysteries of heaven and fate, it was impossible to steal heaven. Those who could do this were mostly grandmasters in the same field. Stealing heaven and changing fate was against the will of heaven. If it was really implemented, there must be a price to pay. No one was willing to sacrifice themselves for nothing. Therefore, as the highest achievement in metaphysics, stealing heaven and changing fate was mostly a theory. The Lin clan's information in this regard was also vague. After all, no one had realized it. But this seen dragon vein? Li Tianlan had it. As for the foundation, Great Master Wu Wei might be able to provide it. As for the executor, Xian Xuanzi also joined the Samsara Palace. That was to say, the theory might become reality. Xian Xuanzi was dead. Lin Fengting sighed softly and walked to Qin Weibai's side. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. Qin Weibai had calmed down. She opened her eyes, which were blank and unfocused. The sound of her heartbeat constantly vibrated in her consciousness, synchronized with her own heartbeat. One heartbeat was extremely clear and powerful, with the power of mountains and seas, while the other heartbeat was extremely weak. Qin Weibai blinked her eyes hard. She reached out her hand and gently touched the air in front of her. What is she doing? Lin Fengting frowned slightly. Nalan Shuring shook her head and said, honestly, I don't know. There was no sound. There was no light. Qin Weibai seemed to be completely immersed in her own world. Her attention was absolutely focused and seemed to have entered a new height. Everything in the darkness in front of her was gradually fading. The darkness was slowly fading. The fire in front of her burned and rose into the air, flying away and getting farther and farther. The fire disappeared. The darkness disappeared. A large expanse of soft and warm foam appeared in front of Qin Weibai. The foam completely wrapped her whole body with the smell of nutrient solution. In a trance, Qin Weibai seemed to feel that she had turned her head. Her sight was clear and bright. She passed through the nutrient solution and saw a huge seal nutrition chamber. The light shone in from outside the nutrition chamber. She saw the neatly arranged high-tech instruments. She saw Horsewoman. She saw Lin Fengyue, Lin Fengting, and Nalan Shuring. Then she saw herself. She was lying on an instrument. She reached out and touched the air in front of her. Phew! Qin Weibai suddenly sat up, gasping for breath, and her face was pale. Boss, how are you? Horsewoman took a step forward and looked at Qin Weibai with panic in her eyes. Qin Weibai kept taking deep breaths. She shook her head and was a little uncertain. I just seemed to be dreaming. The long darkness was like an unexplored, forbidden zone of thinking, but it was also like a vast and boundless space that really existed. The burning flame brought a glimmer of light in the absolute darkness. The flame was burning, but it was extremely cold around her. She was a flame. She kept shuttling in the long silence and almost eternal darkness. She didn't know where she was. She could feel that her body was soaked in the nutrient solution. Vaguely, she seemed to hear Mr. Lin talking. She heard Horsewoman's voice. Countless voices were torn apart into a messy sound line. Her thoughts seemed to leave her body and rush to the distance. It was like a dream, but it was the most realistic dream. She could feel the feeling of walking step by step into the dream from reality. The boundless darkness was not fleeting, but continuous and long. She quietly counted the time. There was no time in the night. The time was not synchronized, and there was no meaning in existence. The distance was not synchronized, and it was also meaningless. Her thoughts were like a flame, constantly floating in the long and distant darkness, without life and death, without any emotion. 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years. She felt tired. The spiritual power of the transcendent realm seemed to have signs of collapse in the eternal darkness. The flame kept trembling. In the extreme darkness, glimmers of light lit up one after another. They were like stars, pulsing with her thoughts. In the almost numb coldness, she felt a touch of warmth for the first time. Once again, she heard the voice and saw the light. From today onwards, I am your family. Everyone here is your family. Vaguely, she heard someone talking. It was a quiet, incomparably warm voice. Her thoughts extended out frantically along the voice. The darkness disappeared. A delicate small city appeared in her sight. Under the blue sky, the whole city was like a garden. Some people were walking in the garden carefreely. All the vehicles were driving underground. There were birds chirping in the city, and some animals were also walking freely in the city. A middle-aged man held the hands of 2 children, and his voice was a little tired. The 2 children were a boy and a girl. The boy was only about 3 years old, but his expression was extremely stubborn. The girl was a little older, wearing dirty little clothes. She was held by the man and was a little timid. "Forgotten city," she said timidly. "Where is this?" "This is our home." "In Switzerland." The middle-aged man whispered. "My home is in Linen. I want to find my mother." The little girl lowered her head and said cautiously, "I want to find my grandparents." The muscles on the middle-aged man's face twitched, and there was a touch of extreme anger and helplessness in his eyes. The boy on the side was quiet and motionless. Dad, Mom and Grandma have gone to a faraway place. They asked me to take care of you for the time being. When you grow up, you can go to find them by yourself, okay? The man touched the girl's hair with his palm. Okay. The two children spoke at the same time. A one-armed young man walked over slowly. His face was pale, and his body was shaky. It seemed that he was seriously injured. Dad, the young man nodded to the middle-aged man and called him. How are your injuries? The middle-aged man asked softly. Fortunately, I won't die. The young man forced a smile, and there was a touch of hostility on his face, which had not been worried before. My right hand is gone. I can still draw the sword with my left hand. The 3-year-old boy stared at the young man's empty right arm and looked a little curious. The young man bent down and seemed to feel a little inconvenient. He simply knelt down in front of the little boy on one knee and touched his head with his left hand. How old are you? The boy shook his head. He didn't know how old he was, and no one cared about this. Still a child, the young man said softly. The young man said softly. He pointed at his empty sleeves and asked, Are you afraid? The boy still shook his head and said nothing. The young man hesitated, and a small sword slipped out of his left cuff and handed it to the boy. Do you like it? Yes. The boy nodded, and his voice was clear. This is something that will accompany you for a lifetime. The young man laughed, and his eyes were complicated. I hope you can be safe and happy all your life. But you are the son of my best brother. Child, you have your own responsibilities and hatred. I am almost a useless person now. In the future, I can only rely on you. The middle-aged man hesitated, let go of the boy's palm, and whispered, I have decided to accept him as an apprentice. The young man was stunned and said with a smile, The seniority is a bit messy. I have made an agreement with him. This is my adopted son. But it doesn't matter. He took the boy's hand and whispered, My name is Lin Yuxian. From today on, I am your adopted father. I can teach you everything I know. If I can't, I will find someone to teach you. What's your name? Li Dongsheng. The boy glanced at the middle-aged man and whispered, I hope you can remember a name. Maybe it will be your lifelong enemy. What's your name, Godfather? Hao Yin. I am about 2 years older than you. My father? Why did he die? Winner takes all. There is nothing despicable in this world. When despicable is put on someone's head and put in the history book, it doesn't matter whether he is hateful or not. What matters is that he must be a loser. Dongsheng, your father is not such a person. You just neglected it and failed. Grandpa, Grandma, family, don't think about them. Dongsheng, keep them in your heart. One day, you'll get them back. What about your arm, Godfather? It was cut off, but it doesn't matter. Your mother killed him for me. I don't need you, boy. This is your father's kendo. It is much more perfect than the Lin clan's kendo. Can you stand it? Yes, but your injury is very serious. Oh, it doesn't matter. Go to your master later. He has something to give you. Your body is on the verge of collapse. Rest for a while, or you will die. Before I die, all the people who deserve to die will die. In the dim light, the 15-year-old boy's face was tough and indifferent. The light kept alternating. The 4 seasons were changing. It was like a dream from a very long time ago. The firelight stayed there, watching the changes year after year. Her mind had been calm, without any fluctuation. Bastard, who let you go? Do you want to die? Do you know you almost couldn't come back? But I killed him. Yes, you killed him, and you will die too. But I still killed him. I killed an invincible realm expert. But I am not invincible. Shut up. What's so great about killing an invincible realm expert? Godfather died in his hands. I killed him and his family. I avenged my godfather. Ahem, master. Do you know that I don't even dare to go to my godfather's grave to kowtow every Qingming festival? This is just the first one. The Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, the Heroes Club, none of them can run away. They will all die. I will kill them all. Shut up. You should rest now. The dragon shows its head, but not its tail. The dim sunlight shone on the verdant, forgotten city. The man in the wheelchair was extremely dry, but he smiled contentedly. I took the fate of the purgatory of heaven capital. Celestial Emperor? Humph. The Celestial Emperor who carries the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State is just a dog. He bowed down first. Dongsheng, from now on, there is no need for Zhongzhou State. You are the dragon vein, and only the dragon vein. From now on, the world will not only know Xin Xuanzi and Wu Wei, but also me, Lin Su. The dragon shows its head, but not its tail. In the future, if possible, spare Celestial Emperor Huawu's life. You need someone to carry the dragon's tail for you. The dim yellow in the sky gradually disappeared. The man in the wheelchair disappeared with the wind little by little. At the moment when day and night alternated, he stood up and whispered, "I entered the invincible realm." Jiang Qinsong died. The headquarters of the Jiang family of South America was directly blown up. The Lin clan's new invincible realm appeared. The Lin clan, saying, "What is the Sword Dynasty? Pass my order." The Heroes Club declared war on the Sword Dynasty today. I'd like to see how capable a young man who hasn't even grown his hair can be. Then I'll show you. Within a year, the Heroes Club and the Jiang family were destroyed. Li Dongcheng lost his mind and slaughtered 16 wealthy consortiums in Star State. At present, Star State, Snow Country, Zhongzhou State, and England have formally submitted an application to the United Nations. The United Nations has approved the application and officially declared the Sword Dynasty a terrorist organization. They will launch an all-out attack. The Lin clan withdrew from Switzerland. Everyone disappeared. The Sword Dynasty is finished. The Lin clan is also finished. They are courting death. What do you want to do? Let go of him. Bastard Li Dongsheng, what do you want to do? Mr. President, you're too excited. Is this your mother? The sword light flashed for a moment. A head was directly chopped off. The head flew into the arms of the middle-aged white man with a lot of blood. Take a good look. Is she your mother? Oh, your son is so cute. How do you want him to die? Don't speak. How about this? Swish. In the scream, an arm was directly cut off. No. Swish. Another arm. No. Stop. Okay, I'll stop. He's bleeding a lot. Tisk, it's beautiful. Call the doctor. The doctor is on the way, along with some special forces from your country. Jingzhe, how's the situation? 5 minutes. I'll kill them all. Did you hear that? They might not be able to come. Come, here's your phone. Call some others to try. The United Nations officially withdrew the charges against the Sword Dynasty and clarified that everything was just a misunderstanding. The world will not forget the Sword Dynasty's support for them. His Majesty Li Dongsheng, as a famous philanthropist, has been officially awarded the Peace Medal by the European Union. Nobel Peace Prize winner Li Dongsheng. Light flashed and time passed. That ball of fire floated quietly in the dreamland that seemed real and illusory. That year, Li Dongsheng was already 33 years old. The Sword Dynasty swept across Europe. The Lin clan regained control of Switzerland. That year, Li Dongsheng lost the sword that he thought would accompany him for the rest of his life. Because of this sword, he was called His Majesty. His Majesty the Sword God. Time flew by in a hurry. The invincible realm experts in the entire dark world died one by one. The Sword Dynasty's bases were built all over the world. The administrative department of the Sword Dynasty officially issued a document. His Majesty Li Dongsheng will come to Zhongzhou State in 2 days. The administrative department asked the Zhongzhou State Parliament to be ready to welcome him. His Majesty will stay in Lin, Yuzhou, and Beihai. In the firelight, her mind had become extremely slow. She watched Li Dongsheng arrive in Lin. She watched the plane fly from Lin into Beihai. All the light disappeared. In the long, almost eternal darkness, it seemed that decades had passed. She saw the wind and snow in Beihai. She saw Li Dongsheng walk up Mount Dibbing, where summer solstice was guarding. Father's sword, the firelight trembled. She felt a strong and complete vitality. The vitality was like a dragon, sweeping across the land of Zhongzhou State. In the dark, the complete dragon vein in Li Dongsheng's body was broken. The dragon tail that belonged to his era was transferred to Li Tianlan, and the dragon tail of this era rushed into Li Dongxing's body with unimaginable vitality. So each was complete. So each was perfect. Li Dongxing disappeared. Eternal darkness and silence enveloped everything again. The extremely long dream that seemed to last for 100 years seemed to begin to break apart. Once again, she saw a flash of light. The light and shadow were eroded by the darkness little by little. In a trance, it was like a small village in a province in the south of Zhongzhou State. A plainly dressed girl was walking quietly on the road. Her appearance was exquisite and perfect. Although her clothes were plain, she looked like a noble and proud little princess. Behind the girl was an old monk in a cassock with a kind face. "Where are you going?" the old monk asked softly. "It's probably in front, if I remember correctly." The girl raised her head and looked quietly at a seemingly ordinary orphanage in front of her with a pair of bright eyes. "Are you looking for someone here?" the monk asked curiously. "Who are you looking for?" "I don't know," the girl whispered. "I'm here to have a look. Whether I can find him or not, from today on, I should have my own name." She walked forward slowly and entered the orphanage. A girl in a small dress, full of patches, happened to walk out of the door. The two girls froze for a moment at the same time and looked at each other blankly. In each other's eyes, there was a face that was exactly the same as each other's. "You." The girl clutched the patches on her clothes and looked at the girl in front of her who was as proud as a palace master. She whispered, "Who are you? What's your name?" The proud girl looked at her, her eyes calm and indifferent. I'm Qin Wei Bai." The girl asked timidly, "Who are you?" "I'm Qin Wei Bai." The girl nodded and said lightly. But the girl hesitated and seemed to want to cry. "Who am I?" "You? From today on, your name is Gu Xianyan." Chapter 750. It was as if they were destined to meet. They were the perfect mirror images of each other. Their faces were exactly the same, their heights were exactly the same, and even their natural fragrance was exactly the same. The afterglow of the setting sun shrouded their shadows. The slight darkness on the horizon was swallowing up the world. The two girls looked at each other quietly. But vaguely, it seemed that two souls were confronting each other. The girl's clothes were simple and clean. Her pride and strength seemed to emanate from her bones. Her every move was natural. However, behind this pride and strength, there was indescribable exhaustion and haggardness. The girl in front of her was weak, ignorant, naive, and ignorant. Her soul seemed to be completely shrouded in the shadow of the other party, looking delicate and pitiful. "Remember your name from now on. You are Gu Xianyan." The proud girl's voice was calm and elegant, unhurried, like the sound of heaven. "I am Qin Wei Bai, but I am Qin Wei Bai," the girl said timidly, and her smart eyes gradually overflowed with tears. She was a little scared and subconsciously wanted to run away, but the perfect and delicate little face was very clear in her sight. Perhaps because of the confusion in her heart, her steps were a little hesitant. "I don't like the name Gu Xianyan." The girl in front of her, who looked exactly like her, nodded and said coldly, "I don't like it either." Then there was nothing. The girl finally cried out. She felt wronged and lost. In her small mind, she still could not understand what it meant to be domineering. However, this big sister who looked exactly like her wanted to steal her name. This made her very sad. Sparkling tears flowed down from her eyes and fell on her patched clothes. She pursed her lips and did not make a sound. "Remember it?" The other party quietly watched her cry, silently, and repeated it again, unhurriedly. "Sister, who the hell are you?" The girl looked at her carefully, and her tears could not be stopped. She looked so pitiful. "I am Qin Wei Bai." The other party's face was calm. "You're not." "I am Qin Wei Bai." The girl cried out and became more and more wronged. She looked so pitiful that it made people tremble. "Why did you take my name?" "Because that's my name." Her voice was very serious. "But who the hell are you?" She trembled and asked carefully. In his line of sight, that proud and domineering face seemed to gradually melt, turning into a touch of warmth. I am you. She softly said, I am the future you. You are the past me. Behind her, great Master Wu Wei, who had followed her all the way, sighed softly, distant and peaceful. Deathly stillness and darkness completely enveloped the world. It was not nightfall. Instead, it was an indescribable silence. It was as if an eternal darkness was shrouding them bit by bit. The light was disappearing, and everything became silent. She became that ball of fire again. The faint light was no longer drifting about. Darkness shrouded over, pulling all the light away. Silence eternal, endless. Countless thoughts seemed to be torn into countless pieces in an instant, and messy images kept flashing. The fire was still burning, but in the darkness, the fall seemed to be endless. A hurried warning sounded in the biological laboratory of the Lin clan. That was the reaction that the degree of operation of the machine had reached its limit. Near the nourishment chamber, a huge screen suddenly flashed. Majestic data surged up crazily. It was not the pale white that represented death, nor was it the silver gray that represented serious injuries, nor was it the green that represented health. All the data was completely bright red, and the value instantly broke through the peak of the machine. The warning sound of the machine suddenly stopped, and the screen began to flicker, and then the screen went completely black. Lin Fengting looked at this scene in astonishment. Nalin Shuying and Qin Weibai had left. Lin Fengyue, the person in charge of the biological laboratory of the Lin clan, came out, looked at the red data that had been recorded in front of him, and raised his eyebrows. Lin Fengting didn't ask what was going on. He knew the function of that instrument. It was a brain field link device. Although it could not accept the other party's thoughts, it could roughly observe the other party's thinking activity through data. For several months, the injured person's mind had been in a state of chaos, dead silence. But occasionally there were fluctuations, which was why the Lin clan could be sure that she would survive. At this time, the data detected by the instrument had all broken through the peak that the instrument could detect. For Lin Fengting, this was enough of a surprise. When will she wake up? Lin Fengting asked. It's difficult. Lin Fengyue shook her head. The brain field link device can detect the mental state of a human brain. This situation, her tone was a little hesitant and unbelievable. Her spiritual attainments have always been terrifying. Lin Fengting chuckled and said, in terms of spirit, she can even be said to be the person closest to the transcendent realm. That was the situation before. If she was only close to the transcendent realm, then her mental state could not reach the peak of this instrument at all. I'm not sure about the current situation, but I can be sure that at least at that moment, her mental state has far exceeded the boundary of the so-called transcendent realm. Lin Fengyue looked at Lin Fengting with a complicated look in her eyes. But even such a strong spirit did not wake her up. What do you mean? Lin Fengting frowned. He had said this sentence many times in the past few days, and he wanted to vomit when he heard it. Her body is too weak to support her spirit. At present, the most optimistic result is that even if she wakes up, it is impossible for her to return to the state of the invincible realm at the peak. The best result is that she can return to the level of an ordinary person. There is no possibility of her martial arts being preserved. From this point of view, her injury is much more serious than that of summer solstice. All her martial arts foundation is gone, but her spirit has broken through a certain boundary. If we divide it according to the strength of spirit, her current spirit is not weaker than that of the legendary Pope. She lost martial arts, but she reached the peak in the field of spirit. Lin Fengting was silent for a while and said, "This is compensation. Don't you understand?" Lin Fengyue said worriedly, "Her mental strength is too strong. She can even be said to have consciousness now, but she can't wake up. Do you think this is a good thing?" Lin Fengting's face changed and suddenly became serious. She had consciousness, but she couldn't wake up. In the case that she couldn't wake up, she could only face darkness. Her consciousness had been kept awake in the darkness. This time might be a year, or it might be 10 years, or even longer. The question was, could she hold on? Lin Fengting's body was stiff. He turned his head little by little, and looked at the figure curled up in a nutrient solution in the nutrition pod. A large amount of nutrient solution had been undergoing the most intense reaction, absorbing, surging, and replenishing. It was quiet in the nutrition pod, but bubbles appeared one after another on the edge of the nutrient solution, which was similar to foam. The bubbles and foam completely surrounded her body. Lin Fengding could only see her pale face. He stood quietly and kept silent for a long time. He didn't know when Lin Fengyue had retreated. Across the nutrition pod, Lin Fengding quietly stared at her face. Even though he had known her for a long time, even though he had seen too many so-called characters, as he quietly gazed at this face, he still had to admit that this was the most perfect face he had ever seen in his life. Exquisite, dreamy, flawless. Like a white cloud under a clear sky. Like the bright moon among the stars. That was a kind of soul-stirring charm. She was fairy-like, beautiful, and unparalleled in the world. Yes, unparalleled. He had seen Qin Weibai. The gap between them was really very small, and it could even be said that there was no difference at all. But perhaps because of his preconceived notions, he always subconsciously felt that Qin Weibai was a little strange, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. It could only be said that it was a psychological effect, and the one in front of him could really match her perfection. She slept quietly in the nutrient solution, motionless. Her eyebrows were picturesque, weak and quiet. Lin Fengding stood for a long time before he sighed softly and slowly turned around. A figure stood quietly beside Lin Fengding, squinting, casually holding a glass of red wine, and looking a little playful. Lin Fengding was stunned and blinked subconsciously. At this moment, he even thought that he had seen it wrong. This was a very young figure. His appearance could not be considered handsome, but his face was very clean and looked a little delicate. He wore a white suit and had short hair. His expression was very meaningful, but it looked very gentle. But under this gentleness, Lin Fengding clearly felt a touch of faint but extremely fierce aggression, showing off his ability. Even if he stood there motionless, he could give Lin Fengding a very fierce and powerful feeling. That was the sword intent unintentionally revealed from all over his body, with a kind of invincible and invincible aura. He looked in the direction of Qin Weibai, but his eyes were extremely fiery, like a hunter who had seen his prey and was eager to conquer her. Lin Fengding frowned. He didn't like the look in her eyes, and at the same time, his heart was even more shocked. Tianlan, why are you here? Li Tianlan. It was Li Tianlan who stood here. There was no pain or connection in his expression, and the aggression in his whole body became more and more obvious. He shook the wine glass in his hand slightly, narrowed his eyes, and stretched out his hand with a smile. Are you Gu Xianyan? Gu Xingyun's adopted daughter? Lin Fengding turned around in shock. The scene in front of him was changing. A dim and soft light shone in the laboratory. The cold silver walls of the laboratory began to fade, and the test tables disappeared one by one. There were more and more lights, and it became softer. A crowd appeared in Lin Fengding's sight. Men and women, young, middle-aged, old. Everyone was gathering with their familiar circle, and at the same time, they naturally met some new friends. Everyone was talking and laughing, but everyone's eyes were intentionally or unintentionally looking at Lin Fengding. To be exact, they were looking at the back of Lin Fengding. Dressed in a splendid dress, she slowly walked over. Cold, elegant, arrogant, and calm. The black dress revealed a section of snow-white shoulders, and a delicate diamond necklace was the only decoration on her body. The skirt gently swayed as she walked, like a lotus swaying in the wind. Her expression was not charming and seductive, but her every move carried a kind of perfection that no one dared to blaspheme. Li Tianlan's eyes became more and more fiery and full of interest. Xian Yin greets your highness. She walked to Li Tianlan's side and bowed slightly. The light of the diamond necklace around her neck was reflected in his fiery eyes. Oh, the first beauty of Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan handed the wine glass in his hand to her. You deserve this title. His movements were casual, and his voice was even more casual. Drink it. Several young men and women following Gu Xian, Yin looked slightly angry, but they forced themselves to endure. Her eyes slightly condensed, and then she smiled. The natural fragrance floated slightly, and it was even more intoxicating. Xian Yin, toast, Your Highness. Gu Xian Yin naturally held the wine glass and smiled softly. Her voice was as clear as ice and snow, neither servile nor overbearing. To Your Highness. My Highness? Li Tianlan smiled playfully. I haven't been to your Phoenix Pavilion. What kind of highness can you see? You. Beside Gu Xianyin, a young man in his 30s flew into a rage and suddenly took a step forward. Li Tianlan glanced at him lightly. Facing his eyes, the young man's face suddenly turned pale and his whole body stiffened. There was a flash of annoyance in Gu Xianyan's bright eyes, but she was still as cold as a lotus. Your Highness, you must be joking. A few days ago, I had the honor of meeting Your Highness at the airport. Your Highness killed a new expert of the invincible realm with one strike. Your Highness was brilliant, and your divine power was shocking. Even my foster father felt ashamed when he saw it. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and said faintly, Oh. Gu Xian Yin held the wine glass that Li Tianlan had used and waited politely for a few seconds. Seeing that Li Tianlan had no other reaction, she nodded and said, Your Highness, my friend and I still have to discuss 2 projects. Please excuse me. She did not introduce the man and woman beside Li Tianlan. Their identities were not at the same level, and it was useless to introduce them. Stop. Li Tianlan smiled and raised his hand. The waiter quickly walked over with a tray. Li Tianlan picked up another glass of wine, took a sip, and then handed it to Gu Xianyin. Drink it. Gu Xianyin paused, and her eyes gradually focused. Li, Your Highness, we do have something important to do. Miss Xian Yin is not good at drinking. I am willing to toast Your Highness on her behalf. The young man, who was stiff in place for a long time, could not help but take a step forward, looked directly into Li Tianlan's eyes and said, Do you deserve it? Li Tianlan casually leaned against the bar counter, glanced at him, and said lightly, I'm not interested in knowing who you are, and I am not interested in knowing who your father is. Li Tianlan's eyes swept over the man and woman beside Gu Xianyin, and his tone was cold. Get out of here, all of you. Today, she will drink with me here. Li Tianlan. The young man could no longer hold back his anger. Don't go too far. I am Ling Ninhan. Bang. In the dull sound before the young man's voice fell, an enchanting figure suddenly walked over and directly kicked the young man in the chest. The powerful and heavy kick directly sent the young man flying nearly 20 meters away. Blood spurted from his mouth, and his body fell to the ground softly. It was unknown whether he was alive or dead. There were exclamations, and then there was an instant silence. The enchanting figure did not speak. She stood in front of Li Tianlan and slightly bowed. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and remained calm. Gu Xianyan's body tensed for a moment, and she also slightly narrowed her eyes. Naturally, she knew this woman, the enchantress from the Wang family of Beihai. Everyone thought that she was the most loyal lackey around Li Tianlan, but the scene just now, Gu Xianyin thought quietly and lowered her head. Go down. Li Tianlan glanced at the enchantress and said nothing. The enchantress nodded silently, facing Li Tianlan, and retreated step by step. Li Tianlan's eyes swept over the other men and women beside Gu Xianyin, and he said blandly, I will give you 5 seconds. If you don't get out, I will ask your parents to crawl over to take you away. 5, for there was no 3. No matter how humiliated they were, the young men and women immediately turned around and walked away. Li Tianlan smiled, reached out casually, put his arm around Gu Xianyan's slender waist, and held her body in his arms. What are you doing? Gu Xianyan's face suddenly turned red, and she was a little flustered. Drinking, Li Tianlan said blandly. Your Highness, please behave yourself. On such an occasion, This occasion is not important. Li Tianlan said blandly. This is Beihai. Beihai is not yours, but my woman is. Gu Xianyin gritted her teeth. Your Highness, aren't you afraid that the little princess of Beihai, the future patriarch, will be angry and jealous? Your Highness may not be afraid, but I can't afford to offend her. It's okay. She is very obedient. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, and there seemed to be two abysses deep in his eyes. In the future, I should let her teach you how to be obedient. Let me go. Let's go. Dance with me. I won't. Huh? Li Tianlan, what do you mean? In the loud roar, Gu Qianchuan stared at Gu Xianyan, who was held in Li Tianlan's arms. His eyes seemed to spurt fire. The banquet was over, but everyone did not leave, because Li Tianlan did not allow Gu Xianyan to leave. Didn't I say it clearly enough? Li Tianlan held the slightly struggling woman in his arms and kneaded her waist through the thin dress with one hand. He said blandly, "She will stay with me tonight." Why? Has she been used by you? If so, I can give her back to you. Gu Xingyun trembled with anger. The use of the Phoenix Pavilion was indeed very secretive, and it was mixed with some ambiguous atmosphere. However, Gu Xianyan was the pavilion master of the Phoenix Pavilion, and Gu Xingyun normally treated her as a pearl in his palm. He loved her dearly, even more than his own daughter. Was this what a human being would say? Not to mention in Phoenix Pavilion. Even in Zhongzhou State, Gu Xianyan's education and behavior were purer than anyone else's. This sentence was completely insulting to him. Li Tianlan, what do you think Kunlun City is? What do you think Kunlun City is? How long do you think Kunlun City can exist? I'll give you another chance. Now get out of here. If this woman can satisfy me tonight, I can consider letting you live a little longer. First Elder. In the silence, Gu Xianyan's somewhat confused and helpless voice sounded. That kind of extremely tough power directly suppressed her and her backer, and everyone could do nothing. Her voice was very light, but it gradually became firm. I'm willing to stay. Li Tianlan. Gu Xingyun's face turned red, and he trembled all over. The enchantress quickly walked over and handed Li Tianlan a room card. Take it. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and handed the card to Gu Xianyan. Gu Xianyan was held in his arms with a red face. She wanted to refuse, but finally, she reached out and took the room card with trembling hands. Li Tianlan laughed and walked upstairs to the room with the first beauty of Zhongzhou State in his arms. His figure went directly to Gu Qianchuan, getting closer and closer. 10 meters, 5 meters, 3 meters. Gu Qianchuan, who clenched his fists, finally gritted his teeth and stepped aside. You will pay the price, I promise. I don't want to hear nonsense. Get out or die. Li Tianlan left directly without looking back. Lin Fengting looked at this scene in a daze. He did not know where it was, but it seemed to be a very important banquet. When did I come here? He silently thought. What was I doing before I came here? Tianlan? Seeing Li Tianlan leave, Lin Fengting subconsciously took a step forward. Bang! The huge palm directly hit the table, and a thunderous roar suddenly sounded. You killed Gu Qianchuan. Do you know what you were doing? The banquet disappeared. In the spacious conference room, a figure that Lin Fengting looked familiar was roaring angrily. Because he deserved to die, Li Tianlan lowered his head and stroked the golden retriever lying obediently at his feet. As the first person to bring a dog into the conference room of the parliament since the founding of the People's Republic, he had gradually restrained his sharpness. However, his arrogance was becoming more and more obvious. He almost killed my dog. I'm going to kill him. Why are you so angry? Your Majesty, Sword Emperor, Minister Dongsheng, shouldn't you give me an explanation? He is provoking the dignity of the entire Zhongzhou State Parliament. Tianlan is right. Gu Qianchuan deserves to die. This was Wang Tianzong's voice. Reconsider. Dongsheng Wudi said lightly. You. Crack. With a crisp sound, the teacup fell to the ground and shattered. Lin Fengting watched this scene quietly. Looking at Wang Tianzong, he felt something was wrong. When he was about to go up and say hello, the scene in front of him suddenly widened after he took a step forward. The vast snow-capped mountains were endless. Snow was flying over Kunlun City. Li Tianlan's figure floated in the air, looking at Kunlun City under his feet with an indifferent expression. Gu Xianyan was held in his arms. She wore a white windbreaker made of cloud silk, which made her figure more extraordinary. White flags were hung in Kunlun City. Gu Qianchuan's funeral had just passed. Many important high-ranking officials and tycoons in Zhongzhou State came here to attend Gu Qianchuan's funeral. Li Tianlan and Gu Xianyan appeared last. There was no courtesy. There was only a notice similar to an order. Gu Xianyan leaves Kunlun City today. That's it. She belongs to Kunlun City. Why does she leave? Li Tianlan, don't go too far. Gu Xingyun's sad and indignant voice resounded through the sky. She is the Phoenix Pavilion leader cultivated by Kunlun City. Everyone here knows that. What qualifications do you have to let her leave Kunlun City? Xianyan, do you agree? A white windbreaker made of cloud silk seemed to blend in with the wind and snow. Gu Xinyan's face was a little pale. This truly invulnerable cloud silk windbreaker was the result of Li Tianlan's 4-month war in Europe and the United States last year. He made 3 pieces of clothes with the cloud silk. One was given to the future female patriarch of Beihai. Gu Xinyan's was also one of them. He didn't keep any for himself. She bit her lip tightly, looking at Kunlun City and the man beside her. Unconsciously, she had been with him for more than 4 years. Xianyan, do you agree? Gu Xingyun's voice sounded word by word a little gloomy. Well, I'll say it again. Li Tianlan said blandly. Xianyan has nothing to do with Kunlun City. You don't have to pretend to be related to her in the future. She belongs to Kunlun City. Gu Xingyun growled. Really? Li Tianlan said slowly. Who can testify? With flying snow in his eyes, he glanced at the important figures of Zhongzhou State under the city. Invisible sword energy covered the sky and the earth. All the people were silent. No one was willing to testify. Li Tianlan laughed. He pointed to a minister of the Special Warfare Headquarters of Zhongzhou State and said calmly, Tell me, did Gu Xianyan once belong to Kunlun City? The minister swallowed hard. Gu Xianyan certainly belonged to Kunlun City. When she was in Phoenix Pavilion, he even sent the elites of the department to teach her some knowledge she should master more than once. He was Gu Xingyun's confidant and had always been so. However, in the face of the overwhelming sword energy, he hesitated and finally lowered his head. He said hoarsely, I haven't seen her in Kunlun City. I think this lady has nothing to do with Kunlun City. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and pointed to another speaker. What do you think? Is this lady surnamed Gu? It's just the same surname. It's a coincidence. The speaker laughed. This is the woman around His Highness. Naturally, she has nothing to do with Kunlun City. What do you think? The rolling sound waves shook Kunlun City. Everyone agreed that Gu Xianyan and Kunlun City had nothing to do with each other. Lin Fengding looked at this scene quietly. He suddenly thought of a word, calling a deer a horse. You've achieved your goal. Kunlun City was already behind him. Under the flying snow, Gu Xinyan's palm was carefully held by Li Tianlan. His voice was calm. You have me completely. Really? Li Tianlan turned his head and said with a smile. Isn't it? I don't belong to Kunlun City anymore. So many people are testifying for you. Gu Xinyan's tone was sarcastic and sad. But it doesn't include you. Li Tianlan looked at the eyes that made him completely lost and said softly, You can speak just now. If you admit that you have something to do with Kunlun City, no matter how many people testify, it will be meaningless. He took a step forward and said seriously, Why don't you admit it? Gu Xinyan took a step back, her face pale. She grabbed the corner of her clothes and shook her head subconsciously. Answer me, why don't you admit it? I don't know. You know. I don't know. You know. Don't say it. Don't force me. Gu Xianyan burst into tears. Li Tianlan held her tightly in his arms and gently breathed in the fragrance of her hair. He said lightly, Because if you admit it, you will lose me, right? No, it's not like that. Why do you do this to me? I don't want to know you. Bastard, you bastard. Why do you do this to me? You forced me at the beginning. Why? Gu Xinyan broke down emotionally. In the years she had been with Li Tianlan, this was the first time she had completely broken down. Because I like you. Li Tianlan held her tightly and whispered, You're mine. You can only be mine. Do you know that? Do you know? Gu Xianyan held his neck tightly and took the initiative to kiss him. The wind and snow filled the sky. Lin Fengding turned around silently. One step, one world. I'm pregnant. She gently leaned against Li Tianlan's arms, her voice soft. Really? Li Tianlan suddenly sat up, his face full of surprise. Ha ha! He suddenly picked her up and spun her around, his smile extremely presumptuous. I'm going to be a father? Be careful, don't hurt the child. Gu Xianyan stretched out her small hand and pinched Li Tianlan's face, murmuring, bully me, bully me. Her palm was gentle, and the depths of her eyes were full of affection. Li Tianlan put her on his lap and said seriously, What do you want? I will give it to you. It's enough to want you. Gu Xianyan whispered. Li Tianlan was a little embarrassed. Now, the first 3 months, it's not very good. Gu Xianyan blushed and pinched Li Tianlan's face. Bad guy, what are you thinking? Li Tianlan laughed and held Gu Xianyan in his arms. What are you thinking? Gu Xianyan whispered. I'm thinking that it's time to bring Yuetong here. Our family should live a good life. It's time to solve some grievances completely. When the time comes, you all give birth to a child for me, and I'll teach them swordsmanship. Well, I should make a sword manual now. Ah, Xianyan, what do you think the child should be called after he's born? What's the child's surname? Gu Xianyan's tone was a little hesitant. Li or Dongshan? Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. It's better. Li Tianlan whispered. I'm used to it. If it's a son, how about Li Dongshan? Gu Xianyan rolled her eyes at him. Naming a child is so perfunctory. I hate it. Hee. Your Majesty, Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai sent an invitation. It's a wedding invitation. What wedding? Li Tianlan asked casually. Beihai officially confirmed Wang Shengxiao as the heir of the Wang family of Beihai. Wedding. 3 days later, it's the wedding of Wang Yuetong, the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, and Gu Han's Han, the young master of Kunlun City. Whoosh! The sword energy suddenly flew up. Under the main hall, a group of people all knelt down. Your Majesty, please calm down. Tianlan, this is not true. Beihai can't marry Yuetong to Gu Han's Han. They just want you to go there. Oh, go there. Okay, I'll fulfill their wish. You can't go. I have to go. Please don't go. Li Tianlan still went. Quarreling, crying, there was no way to stop him. Before he left, he just asked her to wait for him at home, waiting for him to take them to the Vatican again. He said that flowers would be sprinkled all over the world. What Gu Xianyan saw was the wind and snow falling all over the world. In the darkness, a figure slowly came out, squinting and smiling gently. Xianyan. Gu Xianyan's body shook violently, and she suddenly stood up. Gu Xianyan stood not far behind her, with an easygoing smile and cold eyes. How did you get in? She asked slowly. Gu Xianyan did not answer. He just looked at her bulging belly, and his eyes became colder. How many months has it been? The wind and snow were flying. It was snowing heavily. The invincible realm lay dead. The murderous weapon was broken. The blood dyed the snow red, and there were corpses everywhere. The sky over the snow-capped mountain was cold and gloomy like a nightmare. Who dares to fight with me? I have a sword, and I'm willing to go with you. The sword light cut through the snow-capped mountain. It was as dazzling as a rainbow, and it was extremely beautiful. The huge black sword was instantly furious, and countless sword energy surged out. It was about to fight back. At that moment, the astonishment in his eyes turned into relief. He clenched the huge sword in his hand, and the sword energy that burst out of the huge sword was instantly borne by him. The sword energy entered his body, and his body shook a little. All the counterattack of the huge sword was suppressed by him. He looked at the beautiful figure calmly, and his eyes were peaceful. The next second, the blade that cut through the wind and snow suddenly pierced his heart. It hurts. Why don't you fight back? You'll die. He looked at her belly and smiled. He'll die too. How dare an ordinary man call himself an emperor? Ridiculous. You end up like this today, and Wang Tianzong will end up like this in the future. On the snow-capped mountain in the distance, the sword emperor, who had lost his arm, was covered with scars and was almost lifeless. I'm sorry. It's understandable. After all, your surname is Gu. I'm sorry. You don't have to do this. I'm very tired these years. I'm too tired. It's time to rest. I'm sorry. I want to go home. I'm sorry. I really want to. He looked at her belly. Take a look at him. I'm sorry. His body fell into her arms. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Ah. Lin Fengting finally realized what she was seeing. One step, one world. This was the world that impressed her most deeply in her heart. Her mental state was out of control unconsciously, and the spirit beyond the transcendent realm broke out in an instant. At this moment, Lin Fengting knew very well that she was hypnotized. He walked in the deepest world of her heart, and what he saw was a picture that he didn't know belonged to the past or the future. He took a step forward. Wang Tianzong died. Very good. The Wang family of Beihai. Haha. After so many years, it's time for them to come to an end. Where's Gu Xianyan? I don't know. After that battle, he disappeared. Lin Fengting kept walking. Countless pictures flashed in her mind, becoming more and more messy. Her spirit seemed to begin to calm down. The world kept changing. He saw Huading. Dongqing Rushi in a red dress jumped down from the highest building. He saw Gu Xianyan again. Then he saw himself. Gu Xianyan was holding a child and holding a little girl by her side. The picture was vague. The sound was intermittent. Please, sir, the holy disciple of the Lin clan. 2 children. How did they get lost? Bastard, go and find them. Go and find them for me. He saw the waves of the West Lake. An extremely angry sword light cut through the entire West Lake and seriously injured Gu Xianyan. But the huge sword edge fell on her hand. That was the end of an era. It was the madness of a woman. At the end of that era, the mournful sword light shone on the entire dark world. One after another, the invincible realm experts died under the huge sword edge. She walked to Mount Dibbing. The violent sword light destroyed everything. The sword light of 6 paths of reincarnation rotated wildly. The awe-inspiring sword energy left wounds on her body one after another. But the huge sword edge was always stable and kept moving forward. The sword light of 6 paths of reincarnation completely collapsed. There seemed to be Song Si's desperate cry in the distance. Lin Fengting took another step. The world in front of him had become dark. She held the sword edge tightly, opened her dim eyes, and looked at the sunshine outside the sky. The tide of Beihai kept ringing under her. I'm sorry, she murmured and closed her eyes completely. Wang Shengxiao's body fell, without any vitality. Lin Fengting's eyes fell into complete darkness. It was like the last world. Her figure finally fell into Beihai. The eternal coldness and darkness swept everything. The weight of the huge sword suddenly increased countless times. Her body kept sinking to the bottom of the sea. Lin Fengting was trapped in this dark world, and there was no way out. He didn't know how long it had been. A faint sword light lit up in front of him. The huge sword was constantly shining, as if it was tearing the ocean apart. The seawater disappeared. White snow appeared in front of Lin Fengting. That was like the last picture. It was like the first rebirth. The little girl in ragged clothes lay in the snow. Her body had become very small, and the wounds caused by the 6 paths of reincarnation became more and more intricate as her body shrunk. It was as if the most profound 6 paths of reincarnation's sword manual was carved on her body. That was the power of time. The wind and snow were flying. The girl was lying in the snow, with a dark, huge sword beside her. Not far away, 3 monks were walking over in the snow. When they saw the figure on the snow, their faces changed, and they immediately sped up. Lin Fengting took a step forward subconsciously. Buzz! The snow was gone. Everything was gone. Cold metal lights appeared in front of his eyes. Everything in the laboratory appeared in front of him again. Dad, sir? Wind and snow. Patriarch? Voices rang out one after another. Lin Fengting glanced at the crowd around him blankly. Dad, what's wrong with you? You've been standing here for nearly 7 days. Lin Yuxian walked over quickly, his voice trembling. It's okay. Lin Fengting smiled weakly. I read a story that she once told me herself. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. One step, one world. In that state of hypnosis, even if he was a half-step chosen one, 7 days almost dragged down his will. His body fell into Lin Yuxian's arms, but his mind was thinking of the sword on the snow mountain and the little figure in the snow. He smiled and whispered, "What a fool." It happened to be over 10,000 words, so this paragraph is not worth money. Let me tell you something that happened in the real world. At Haneda Airport in Japan in 1954, a white guy claimed that he came from Tailed, a country with a history of thousands of years. His passport was real, and it was even stamped with Japanese and European entry and exit stamps. However, there was no country called Tailed in the world. In a stalemate, the customs arranged for this guy to stay in a nearby hotel and sent someone to guard him. But the next morning, this guy from Tailed disappeared mysteriously. It's a famous story, and there are actually many similar things. What I want to say is about the theory of undetermined parallel universes. The so-called undetermined means that it may or may not exist. This kind of thing can only appear in urban plots. For many things, if you don't believe it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Of course, if you believe it, it doesn't mean it exists. This is a matter of personal opinion. I believe in his existence, so I wrote it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. If this is a fantasy world, there are already many so-called unsolved mysteries that prove that the world we live in is a fantasy world. Actually, I quite like reading unsolved mysteries. Really, IF * King like it. I believe in aliens, I believe in parallel universes, and I like watching astronomy videos. Why do things in the real world become fantasy when put in novels? A lot of people say that I've written badly, that I've written so badly that I'm confused. I feel that no one can represent me except myself. I'm very clear-headed now. I'm not crazy, and I didn't write badly. I'm very sure. There might not be much need to write these chapters, but I really wanted to write them, so I wrote them. At the end of this chapter, this parallel universe thing is over. Next, it's about Li Tianlan. The debate about this can end here. Also, I can say that I've filled in most of the holes so far. Maybe you guys don't agree, but it doesn't matter. In the end, I'll write about who is who and what relationship they have with each other in the most straightforward way. That counts as filling in holes. Actually, from the very beginning, I've been writing in different directions with different clues. My brothers who are more careful should have noticed it long ago. The only reason you guys don't believe me is that I haven't written about this before. That should be it. This paragraph really doesn't count. Good night, everyone. Chapter 751. The first lunar month was about to pass. The day in the desert had gradually become hot. In the warden's dormitory, Li Tianlan, who was wearing a white shirt casually, hung up the call with Dong Xingwudi. He looked at the yellow sand outside the window and narrowed his eyes. It had been half a year since he entered the desert prison. The desert was as quiet as usual, but the dark world was already turbulent. The influence of the mysterious expert's attack on the Wang family of Beihai half a month ago had completely spread. The video of the incident was completely spread throughout the dark world through different channels. The overwhelming sword swept up the fallen leaves on Mount Dibbing. The majestic sword energy seemed to have the power to break the screen in the video and smashed into the hearts of all the big shots in the dark world. The casualties and losses of the Wang family of Beihai had already been calculated. Maybe it couldn't be called casualties and losses. It should be called death losses. No, to be exact, it should be a missing persons report. The sword covered tens of thousands of meters of heaven and earth, from the foot of the mountain to the top of the mountain, and swept a distance of thousands of meters. The momentum was tremendous and earth-shattering, but the whole process only took dozens of seconds. In these dozens of seconds, nearly 2,000 elites of the Beihai Corps stationed on Mount Dibbing that day disappeared, 1,700 people of the Beihai Internal Defense Force disappeared, and hundreds of people of the Heaven Punishment Troop, which the Wang family of Beihai was proud of, disappeared, including 9 thunder-shocking realm experts. From the foot of the mountain to the top, nearly 400 sniping points on Mount Dibbing were destroyed, and all the snipers were missing. 4 sets of weapon systems that could cover the entire Mount Dibbing were completely destroyed. The Alloy Research Institute and No. 2 Biological Laboratory, hidden in the belly of the mountain, exploded, and 16 doctors were missing. Yes, missing. The moment the sword energy swept past, everyone's body was completely smashed by the violent sword light. The entire Mount Dibbing was completely turned into a white land by the sword, and not even a drop of blood was left on the spot. All the people who guarded the front of Mount Dibbing that day were evaporated by the sword, and no bones were left. Mount Dibbing was directly split into 2 halves from the summit to the ground. The 2 Mount Dibbing were hundreds of meters apart. The water of the North Sea gushed in from this huge crack, submerging nearly 1/7 of the area of Shenzhou City. Most of the area at the foot of Mount Dibbing was submerged. A military base was covered by seawater. The surging waves even affected the military airport not far away. If Li Tianlan swept across Beihai not long ago was just a hurricane for the Wang family of Beihai, then the sword in front of them was a sudden natural disaster for the Wang family of Beihai. The majestic palace, the elite troops, and the picturesque mountain peaks. Everything disappeared under that sword strike. The shocking sharpness seemed to be completely branded in the sky above the Wang family of Beihai, cutting them down from the peak of the dark world. They were no longer transcendent, no longer mysterious, no longer high above, and no longer insufferably arrogant. The dark world was not happy about it. Even the forces that had been against the Wang family of Beihai, such as the Jiang family of South America, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, and Emperor Dong's palace. No one was gloating. It was gratifying that the momentum of the Wang family of Beihai had fallen. But the mysterious heavenly son who single-handedly crushed the entire Mount Dibbing was also frightening. That was true fear. In a very short time, almost all the super forces in the dark world came to the same conclusion. At present, no one, no force, and no country in the dark world could stop that sword light. The power of this sword was even no less than that of the eternal sword in Eastern Europe. Maybe it was slightly weaker, but no one could see the difference. Such a person, even alone, was enough to set off a real large-scale war in any corner of the world. For this era, the existence of such a person was completely irresistible. All the forces were afraid, because after the silence brought by fear passed, the whole world was in an uproar. Countless forces and countries were secretly issuing orders to find the clues of the mysterious strong man. The shocking sword also exposed the mind of the mysterious strong man. It could be said that he really regarded human life as grass. Such a person could not have no ambition. With his powerful force, it was enough to conquer all the dark forces in an instant and then unify the dark world. Everyone was looking for him, and even planned to join hands to kill him. Half a month had already passed since the incident. The dark world was still in an uproar. But the mysterious heavenly son seemed to evaporate from the world, and all traces of his existence were lost overnight. Zhongzhou State was also looking for him, and even paid close attention to this aspect. So, Airbus, Rolls-Royce, and other companies had been hacked countless times in a few days. Zhongzhou State had looked for the mysterious heavenly son in all aspects, but they had found nothing. Li Tianlan had been observing this matter silently, and had not expressed any opinion. He had contacted Dong Chengwudi on his own initiative. On the day of the incident, the Army headquarters had issued a direct document, and Dong Chengwudi personally signed the order. A highly integrated special force had been secretly dispatched. Dong Chengwudi even wanted to mobilize an ace army to guard the desert prison. However, this motion was not approved by the parliament, so he had to drop it. But Dong Chengwudi did not give up, and he still tried to increase the combat power here. In half a month, nearly 20,000 people had been stationed in the desert prison. Everyone could see that Dong Chengwudi was very nervous. The appearance of the mysterious heaven's favorite was like a huge variable. Up until now, everyone had always thought that only two people could stand against that kind of sharpness. The first was naturally Wang Tianzong in Eastern Europe. The second was Li Tianlan, who had reached the peak. Wang Tianzong was missing. Li Tianlan was still growing. If the mysterious heavenly sun wanted to eliminate the threat in the future, Li Tianlan was his most likely target. Dongqing Wudi had no reason not to be nervous. However, Li Tianlan refused Dongqing Wudi's idea of continuing to increase troops, and he even persuaded Dongqing Wudi to withdraw all the troops that had been temporarily dispatched. He always had an inexplicable sense of familiarity with the mysterious heavenly sun in the video. This sense of familiarity was not the reason why he felt safe, but an intuition. He really didn't think that an expert who had reached that level of personal strength would care about any future threat. If he didn't have this kind of broad-mindedness and bearing, he couldn't have come to this point. That was the real heavenly sun. In the eyes of such a person, there was only one kind of person and one kind of creature in the world: relatives and non-entities. Standing at that level, he wouldn't even have friends. To say the least, that kind of power could easily destroy the weapon system in the desert prison that was enough to stop an expert at the peak of the invincible realm. If he really wanted to come, it would be useless to send an ace army. If he was targeted by such a person, everything he did was in vain, and he couldn't escape at all. Although he could be calm, it didn't mean that he didn't have a sense of urgency. After Wang Tianzong disappeared, there seemed to be a towering mountain in front of him again. An invisible pressure pressed down. The sword light shining at the end of martial arts seemed to have become a huge pressure, pushing him forward. So when everyone was looking for the mysterious heavenly sun and wanted to know who he was, Li Tianlan was thinking about why he could come to that point. The office in front of him was clean and tidy, and a video was playing on the computer. He had played the sword strike that destroyed Mount Dibing hundreds of times. And 3 days ago, the Parliament of Zhongzhou State got another video. It was a pattern taken by the military satellite of Beihai Province. From a condescending perspective, the fallen leaves on Mount Dibing swept into a sky curtain. The sky curtain rushed to the top of Mount Dibing. The sword light of the 6 paths of reincarnation flickered in the fallen leaves and then went out in an instant. There seemed to be only one kind of sword intent between heaven and earth and nothing else. The picture was steady and clear. Li Tianlan clearly saw that the sword intent that was about to cover the top of the mountain suddenly became scattered. Most of the sword energy whistled over and went straight into North Sea. The sword energy rolled up monstrous waves on the sea level. The surging tide suddenly collapsed, and the entire sea area of tens of thousands of miles in the North Sea was almost completely chaotic. A small warship not far away sounded the alarm. The next second, a huge wave as high as 100 meters directly slammed down. The sword energy spread wildly, and the water curtain covered the screen. Vaguely, the whole warship was completely torn by the sword energy, and all the weapons inside exploded. In the earth-shattering noise, the fire burned on the sea level. The two figures on the stage of Formidable Person became extremely small on the satellite picture. Vaguely, the heavenly sun glanced at the stone of Formidable Person. The silver moon sword in the stone of Formidable Person seemed to have fallen into his hand voluntarily or passively. The young man looked down for a while and didn't take the silver moon away. Instead, he put it back. He seemed to have communicated with Summer Solstice, but it was very short. In the surging white mist, the other two people who were at the foot of the mountain directly appeared on the top of the mountain. The next moment, the mighty white mist went straight into North Sea. In an instant, a white line across the sky appeared on the turbulent sea level. The white line kept moving forward on the open sea, getting faster and faster, like a torrent between heaven and earth. Stars. Half an hour. To be exact, it was 26 minutes and 34 seconds. The white line between heaven and earth disappeared. Without any warning, he suddenly disappeared from the satellite surveillance screen. Looking at the distance, in 26 minutes, They had crossed the sea level of hundreds of kilometers from Shangzhou to Liaodong. If they hadn't disappeared and kept moving forward, they could have appeared on the port of Liaodong in less than a minute with their speed. But they suddenly disappeared from the sea level. Until today, there was no trace of their existence. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. This video was much longer than that sword, and every time he watched it, Li Tianlan couldn't help but tremble inside. In 26 minutes, they had crossed the sea level of hundreds of kilometers. This meant more than just speed. This distance was shorter than the distance from Reki City to Mormons. But a large part of the distance from Reki City to Mormons was land that could be borrowed. And this distance was all the water surface that could not be borrowed under normal circumstances. This alone was enough to make up for the gap. When Wang Tianzong broke through, it took him nearly 2 hours to go from Reki City to Mormons. As for Li Tianlan now, not to mention on the water, even if he charged at full speed on land, he couldn't walk that far in half an hour. Even if there was no water limit, his physical strength couldn't rush across the vast ocean from Liaodong to North Sea. This was a chosen one who was really at the peak of his state. Not only was he at the peak of his realm, but also his physical strength and other aspects were at the peak of his age. Li Tianlan squinted and watched the video again. He was silent for a long time in the confrontation between the young man and Summer Solstice on the stage of Formidable Person. What did they say to each other? No one knew the answer to this question. From the attack to the present, the Wang family of Beihai had been silent. They didn't explain to Zhongzhou State or even make any statement to the outside world. Even inside Beihai province, they didn't give any statement. This kind of silence had gradually made the entire parliament of Zhongzhou State nervous. Beep! An urgent document from the army ministry suddenly came to him. Li Tianlan opened it and was slightly stunned. This document was not sent to Li Tianlan, but to Lieutenant General Xiao Mahai, the warden. No matter how remote the desert prison was, no matter how nobody cared about the position of the warden, Xiao Mahai was also a lieutenant general of Zhongzhou State. Although his position was hard, his military rank could be said to be one of the core officers of Zhongzhou State. When something major happened in the Zhongzhou State military, it was inevitable to inform him, even if it was symbolic. But this was the basic rule. The document was very formal, equivalent to a notice. Half an hour ago, the Wang family of Beihai officially announced the result of the handling of Dijiang. Dijiang was expelled from Mount Dibing because of a variety of charges, real and fake, and was escorted to Beihai prison indefinitely. 20 minutes ago, after an emergency discussion, the Army headquarters of Zhongzhou State announced that they agreed to Dijiang's resignation as a member of Zhongzhou State, Marshal, and Commander of the Border Control Corps of Zhongzhou State. The Commander of the Border Control Corps was temporarily held by Dongqing Wudi, the Executive Minister of the Army headquarters. And it was not Wang Qinglei of Beihai or Summer Solstice who officially announced the expulsion of Dijiang and the imprisonment of the new invincible realm expert of Beihai. It was Wang Shengxiao. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and looked at the notice in front of him. He was silent for a long time. Dijiang was expelled and imprisoned. But it was not the capable general of the Wang family of Beihai who took over the Border Control Corps. After going around in circles for a few months, Li Tianlan finally opened her eyes. The position of commander of the Border Control Corps once again fell on Dongqing Wudi. Now he could even be said to be the most powerful executive minister of Zhongzhou State since the founding of Zhongzhou State, and it could even be said that he had power over the court and the opposition. And this unusual action represented Beihai's concession. And Dongqing Wudi taking over this position also meant one thing. In the face of the aggressiveness of the academics and the Prince Group, the Wang family of Beihai had reached an agreement with the Giant Group when Mount Dibing was attacked. Counterattack. Counterattack from the Wang family of Beihai. A storm from the North Sea province. It was about to begin. Chapter 752. At the end of the first lunar month, Mount Dibing was like a huge construction site. Countless construction machines were busy from the mountain to the foot of the mountain, repairing the barren mountain that had become a piece of white land day and night. Wang Xingxiao walked on the huge construction site, supervising the work in person. Occasionally, when he encountered something that needed help, he would give a hand. The construction site was too big, so there were many things that needed help. In less than a morning, Wang Xingxiao was covered with dust. He sat on a stone block to rest. A worker beside him wiped the dust off his hands and handed him a bottle of water. Wang Xingxiao smiled and thanked him. He took the water and took a sip. Looking at the shape of some palaces in the distance, he was silent. Half a month ago, the Wang family of Beihai had officially announced the expulsion of Dijiang. The Kanglin River Jiang family also said that they would remove Dijiang from the family tree. All of this was proposed by Wang Xingxiao. When he didn't feel too much pressure, he directly abandoned the most trustworthy superior of the invincible realm. Wang Xingxiao personally escorted Dijiang to Beihai prison. As soon as he came back, the Wang family of Beihai officially announced Wang Xingxiao as the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. He was not an acting patriarch like Dijiang. He completely replaced Wang Tianzong and became the official patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, as well as the supreme ruler of Beihai province. This year, Wang Xingxiao was just 26 years old. In the face of this young new patriarch, all the people of Beihai were supporting him. In the praise, Dijiang seemed to become the abyss of Beihai province. Innumerable curses and dirty water were poured on Dijiang. Firstly, Tianlan swept all the way from autumn water to Mount Dibbing. Then, the mysterious chosen one destroyed everything on Mount Dibbing with a sword. For the people of Beihai, who had the highest sense of honor and belonging, all of this seemed to be because of Dijiang's cowardice at the beginning. Most people thought that he was a coward for taking the initiative to withdraw the Internal Defense Force and the Heaven Punishment Troop in the face of Li Tianlan. If it weren't for this matter, the powerful Wang family of Beihai wouldn't be treated as a coward and bullied casually. More curses followed. The rumor that there was a deal between Dijiang and Emperor Dong's palace on Mount Dibbing reached the ears of ordinary people in Beihai. As a result, the curses of those with ulterior motives, those who attempted to usurp the throne, and those with wild ambitions rang out in every corner of the North Sea. In the shortest time, Dijiang, who used to be a student of Sword Emperor and had incomparable glory in Mount Dibbing, was completely discredited. Wang Xingxiao had been silent about this. From the beginning to the end, he had never said a word for Dijiang. Even when some of the media directly controlled by them led the public opinion to push all the blame on Dijiang, Wang Xingxiao also acquiesced. His silence and his proposal to expel Dijiang have been widely praised and respected in North Sea. When most of the people focused their attention on spurning Dijiang, no one paid attention to Wang Xingxiao's age. Even because of what he did to eradicate the cancer for Beihai, he naturally gained a lot of support. Even Wang Qinglei temporarily fell silent within the Wang family of Beihai. Everyone was paying attention to the movements of the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. But since he became the official patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, the only order he issued was to repair Mount Dibbing. Apart from that, there was no other action. Silence. For a moment, the entire Mount Dibbing became silent. Wang Xingxiao's silence directly caused the internal turmoil of the Southeast group. Wang Qinglei, who was in Wuyue, frequently took action. He met with some backbone figures in the group, won over people's hearts, and further raised his status. 10 days ago, he personally went to Yuzhou to meet Li Huaqing. The Zhongzhou State Parliament, which had been silent for a while, also began to react after going to Yuzhou to meet Li Huaqing. A tentative investigation team began to enter North Sea. Wang Xingxiao still didn't say anything. He just told the provincial government of Beihai to entertain the investigation team well. So another investigation team entered North Sea. Wang Xingxiao's order was still to entertain them well. The Zhongzhou State Parliament was completely relieved. In the beginning, no one thought that the Wang family of Beihai would always give in. Especially after being attacked by the mysterious expert, the parliament didn't see the opportunity to beat the dog when it was down. Instead, they smelled a touch of danger. They might not know the mysterious chosen one, but they knew enough about the Wang family of Beihai. As the family with the deepest foundation in the dark world, after a series of recent blows, no one believed that the Wang family of Beihai could bear it. They would definitely rebound completely. If they couldn't find the mysterious chosen one, all the counterattacks would probably fall on the academics and the prince group. In such a situation, Wang Qinglei's attitude would even be on the side of the Wang family of Beihai. So the two groups were nervously on guard. But Wang Shengxiao kept silent. After Wang Qinglei officially showed his attitude, Zhongzhou State finally let go of some scruples and began to test him constantly. Wang Shengxiao made concessions again and again in the face of the test, which made people feel that he was too young to handle the situation and was ready to compromise. So all kinds of investigation teams began to enter the Wang family of Beihai and were ready to take action against countless core projects in North Sea. Some of the potential allies of the Wang family of Beihai also showed signs of wavering. 3 listed companies affiliated with the Wang family of Beihai and based in Zhongzhou State began to be suppressed, and their stocks were secretly acquired. Some reports against the officials of the provincial government of Beihai began to fly to the Ministry of Supervision of Yuzhou like snowflakes, and some of the support that Zhongzhou State had provided to Beihai on a regular basis also began to be released. Countless news gathered on Wang Shengxiao's desk every day, and all of them were bad news. The suppression suddenly came from all sides. All of this was because of Wang Shengxiao's young age, because of Summer Solstice's serious injury. It was also because of Wang Qinglei's positive attitude. In the face of a storm that gradually swept through the Wang family of Beihai, all Wang Shengxiao could do seemed to be silent. A plump and enchanting figure slowly walked into the construction site and came to Wang Shengxiao. She whispered, "Patriarch, Madam is calling you." The enchantress from the Wang family of Beihai. Now the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy had passed the initial selection, but there was still some time before the new class began. During this time, the enchantress had been in Beihai province. "Oh, okay." Wang Shengxiao drank some water, stood up, and said casually, "Sixth sister, has my mother taken medicine?" "Yes, she has. Madam's recent injury is more stable." The enchantress whispered, and there was some relief in her eyes. A smile appeared in Wang Shengxiao's eyes. This might be the only good news for the Wang family of Beihai during this time. The night before the mysterious chosen one attacked Mount Dibbing, Summer Solstice saw countless sword lights in the sky. Countless vitality on Mount Dibbing gathered into her body. The injuries that had troubled her for many years were mostly healed overnight, and her completely broken foundation seemed to have the possibility to heal. However, her body, which had just mostly recovered, was seriously injured by the mysterious chosen one's sword again. Summer Solstice's injury was extremely serious, but it could still be regarded as good news. Because countless vitality was still playing a role, as long as her injury was healed this time, she had the possibility to return to her peak state. Summer Solstice temporarily lived in a side hall of Mount Dibbing. In front of the side hall was a path that led to the foot of the mountain. The path had been temporarily repaired, and it looked very smooth. When Wang Shengxiao came over, there were already several cars parked in front of the side hall. Several elites of the internal security force were putting some simple luggage on the cars. Wang Shengxiao glanced at them, said nothing, and went straight in. Summer Solstice sat on the sofa in the living room, dressed neatly, but her face was as pale as paper. Tang Shi and Song Si were chatting with their mother-in-law. Song Si's abdomen was obviously bulging, and her mood seemed to be fragile because of pregnancy. Her big eyes were red and swollen, and it seemed that she had just cried. "What's wrong?" Wang Shengxiao glanced at Song Si and said with some concern, "Are you uncomfortable?" "No." Song Si shook her head and said nothing. "This silly child doesn't want to leave. He wants to stay with you," Summer Solstice said softly. Her injury was extremely serious, but it did not hinder her movement. But when she spoke, she was obviously a little out of breath. Song Si looked at Wang Shengxiao with some expectation in her eyes. Wang Shengxiao was silent for a while, then shook his head and said, "No, you have to leave for a while today." "How long?" Song Si asked softly with a trembling voice. "It won't be long." Wang Shengxiao smiled and said, "When I stabilize the situation of the Wang family of Beihai, I will take you back. But the child is about to be born. I don't want to see you when the child is born." Song Si's voice was hoarse. The gender of the child in her belly had been checked. It was a boy. After a long discussion with Wang Shengxiao, they decided to name it Hao Yin. Song Si was very looking forward to the child's future, but Wang Shengxiao was very determined to send them away. Song Si had mixed feelings. Thinking of the long separation, she felt a little wronged and even more humiliated. She was the woman of the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. When would she leave Mount Dibbing to take refuge? "I will be with you when I have time," Wang Shengxiao whispered. "I heard that you have withdrawn the people you sent out to look for her." Summer Solstice changed the topic and whispered, "Yes." Wang Shengxiao nodded. "Why?" Summer Solstice looked into her son's eyes and asked, "Because it's not necessary. In the current situation, it's better if we can't find my sister. If we can't find her, no one can. The Wang family of Beihai can't help her for the time being. In this case, it's better to let it go." Wang Xingxiao was silent for a while and whispered, "It's said that Emperor Dong's palace is also looking for her. If they find my sister, it's better. At least in Emperor Dong's palace, she won't be hurt." Song Si took a deep look at him. She still wanted to say something, but Wang Shengxiao's cell phone suddenly rang. He took out his cell phone and glanced at the number. His eyes slightly narrowed. "Jingxin." The phone was connected. Wang Shengxiao's voice was very calm. "Shengxiao, I handed in the materials." On the other end of the phone, the voice of speaker Wang Jingxin of Lin and was steady. Wang Shengxiao's eyes suddenly lit up for a moment, and he said in a low voice, he agreed. "Yes, in the past half a month, we have communicated 6 times. Just now is the 6th time. He took the initiative to find me and accepted our conditions." Wang Xingxiao took a deep breath and narrowed his eyes. At this moment, a kind of extremely violent killing intent gradually emanated from his body. The temperature of the whole hall seemed to become cold. Chapter 753. Throughout the hundreds of years of history of the Wang family of Beihai, this period of time could be regarded as their most difficult period. They had experienced ups and downs, and there had been a large-scale change of blood. But it was the first time that they had encountered internal and external troubles, and they had lost their highest combat power. The Southeast Group, which had always been centered on the Wang family of Beihai, also suffered great pressure when the situation in Beihai was turbulent. In the past 6 months, with the continuous moves of the academics and the giant group, some of the peripheral forces of the group had obviously begun to waver, and their attitudes had become ambiguous. Especially during this period, as Wang Qinglei kept talking to some of the backbone forces inside the group, some different voices began to appear among the most important forces inside the Southeast Group. The situation was changing every day. For the Southeast Group, it was getting worse and worse. The 2 directors and several counselors of the Southeast Group all received calls from the feudal officials below. There were a lot of probing in their words, but the leaders of the Southeast Group didn't reveal anything. Mount Dibbing was silent. The leaders at the top level of the Southeast Group were also silent. But in secret, the leaders had communicated with each other and even argued several times. And during this period, the Southeast Group made more and more concessions to the Parliament of Zhongzhou State, especially in the military field. When everyone thought that Dijiang's resignation as the commander of the Border Control Corps and Dongxing Wudi's return to this position was the greatest show of goodwill of the Wang family of Beihai to the giant group, a few days later, everyone found that all this was just the beginning. In just half a month, the Navy of Zhongzhou State was extremely turbulent. General Nan, the deputy commander of the Navy, who was promoted by Dongxing Wudi, officially became the commander of the Navy of Zhongzhou State a week ago. And 3 days ago, the two trump card armies that had been controlled by the Southeast Group also changed hands and were replaced by capable generals who had served as high-level officers in the Border Control Corps. It was said that the Wang family of Beihai had begun to take action against the position of the Secretary General of the Army Headquarters. Although this position had been held by the Special Warfare Group, the Southeast Group and Dong Qingwudi had reached an agreement and decided to promote Bai Qingzhao to the position. If there was no accident, Bai Qingzhao was likely to be promoted in the near future, and he might even become the new counselor of Zhongzhou State at the end of the year. However, as a condition, Bai Zhanfeng, the speaker of Yuzhou, seemed to have to step down, changing the blood, shuffling the cards, centralizing power. Countless fields in Zhongzhou State were in turmoil. Being in it, one could really feel the changes and the magnificence of the situation every day. In the countless changes, a figure of the Southeast Group, who had always been low-key and gentle but had never been ignored by anyone, was becoming more and more prominent in the ever-changing storm. It seemed abrupt, but it was natural for him to walk to the front of the Southeast Group. Military god Yi Dongsheng. Most of the transactions between the Army Headquarters and the Giant Group were presided over by Yi Dongsheng. Not only did they compromise with the Giant Group, but the academics and the Prince Group also gained a lot from the changes. However, such frequent personnel changes did not cause any disturbance in the military from beginning to end. It was not until then that people realized how terrifying the influence of the god of war was in the military. As a result, the dispute among the executives of the Southeast Group became more and more intense. Even Wang Qinglei's position became a little awkward. Yi Dongsheng did not respond to this directly. He just carried out his plan step by step. He went to the front, showed his means, and persuaded Dong Qingwudi. In nearly a week, he had walked into Dong Qingwudi's office to report work for the fourth time. As the most qualified and capital deputy minister in the Army Headquarters to check and balance Dong Qingwudi, his recent performance had attracted more and more people's attention. Yi Dongsheng did not care about this. What he cared about was the result. Now, after more than 2 hours of communication for the fourth time, Yi Dongsheng finally got the result he wanted. When is Wang Jingxin going to do it? Dong Qingwudi smoked the last cigarette in the large office, looked up at Yi Dongsheng, and said in a calm tone, "I can do it at any time." Yi Dongsheng said slowly. With Dong Qingwudi's clear statement, his spirit seemed to be completely relaxed. "In this case, hurry up. I have a lot of different opinions on this matter. You've really forced me into a corner this time." Dong Qingwudi shook his head with a smile, picked up the teacup, and drank some water. For the first time since the two worked together in the Army Headquarters, the atmosphere was so harmonious. Beihai and the Southeast Group are very sincere. "Minister, believe me, a stable situation for us is good for you and His Highness Li Tianlan." Yi Dongsheng said softly. "That's true, but it's a taboo in officialdom after all." Dong Qingwudi was silent for a while, shook his head, and did not say much. What they would do next was to blatantly break the rules. Although there was no fighting or killing, the far-reaching impact was even more serious than Li Tianlan's direct killing of Qin Yuan. However, Yi Dongsheng and the Wang family of Beihai also gave very rich returns. Dong Qingwudi hesitated for several days and communicated with the big shots of the Giant Group many times before he decided to agree. "It's just a little taboo. We are the ones who do the work. If you don't agree, Wang Jingxin will not dare to do it." Yi Dongsheng's tone was extremely frank. Dong Qingwudi was stunned and narrowed his eyes at Yi Dongsheng. He was not surprised by the current situation. The Wang family of Beihai could not do anything alone. Because of Li Tianlan, the Giant Group had become their best ally, so even if they had to pay a high price, they had to make Dong Qingwudi completely consistent with them. The storm that Wang Jingxin was about to set off in Jiangzhou was a piece of candy that the Wang family of Beihai gave to the Giant Group, but it also violated a political taboo. This piece of candy was undoubtedly very sweet. As long as Dong Qingwudi agreed, he had to maintain this result with the Wang family of Beihai. In that special situation, no one could maintain alone. To be exact, as long as Dong Qingwudi agreed, The giant group would be completely on their side. With a backer and an ally, the Wang family of Beihai could have more confidence in the next blood change. Dongqing Wudi knew this very well, but he knew that the meaning was completely different from what Yi Dongxing said directly. Yi Dongxing looked at Dongqing Wudi and nodded slightly, his eyes clear. He did not know why. This was the craziest plan that Wang Shengxiao had put forward since he became the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. The degree of compromise with the giant group came from Summer Solstice's instructions. As Yi Dongxing said, Summer Solstice was indeed very sincere. It seemed that after the mysterious Chosen One attacked Mount Dibbing, Summer Solstice, who was seriously injured, had changed. She gave up some things that she once wanted to hold on to and began to become calmer, more low-key, and more pragmatic. Have you been under a lot of pressure recently? Dongqing Wudi took out another cigarette and lit it. He asked casually, Jiang Huai seems to be very lively. Yi Dongxing's expression darkened for a moment. He frowned and then smiled bitterly. The problem of Jiang Huai had become a problem that the whole Zhongzhou state was paying attention to. The result here also directly determined the Zhongzhou State Parliament's next action against the Wang family of Beihai. Dongqing Wudi would naturally notice it. The situation is out of control. Dongqing Wudi looked at Yi Dongxing's expression and asked slowly, It's not that bad, but this beginning has a very bad influence. Yi Dongxing said slowly. Dongqing Wudi nodded. Jianghuai Province was one of the core back gardens of the Southeast Group. It bordered Wuyue and was deeply influenced by Wuyue. The speaker and the governor of Jianghuai had always been very close to Wang Qinglei. This relationship was nothing before. But in recent days, Wang Qinglei visited Jianghuai, and then the speaker and the governor of Jiangzhou expressed their support for Wang Qinglei on different occasions. It could be said that they had officially shown their attitude and started a fight. This was undoubtedly the first step of Wang Qinglei's plan to conquer the southeast. Wuyue was firmly controlled by him. Jiangzhou now belonged to the Li family and the giant group. At that time, the foundation of the group and the Wang family of Beihai would face an extremely difficult situation. And the cause of all this was that Yi Dongxing's recent high-profile actions made Wang Qinglei feel uneasy. The Navy big shot replaced by General Nan was a close friend of Wang Qinglei. This alone was enough to make Speaker Wuyue feel threatened, so his means became more and more aggressive. Yi Dongxing came from the army headquarters, and Wang Qinglei was in Wuyue. The two of them, who minded their own business, now seemed to have become the most direct competitors within the Southeast Group. As a result, the Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast Group had to adjust their plans and directions for the next few decades, and their own strength would inevitably shrink to a certain extent. This was also the reason why the giant group, and even the academics, could accept it. However, before the result of Jianghuai was clear, Yi Dongxing was destined to bear great pressure. Both of them stopped talking and smoked in silence, deep in thought. They had talked about what should be talked about. The next step was to wait. Waiting for the rainstorm. The shrill ringing of the phone suddenly rang in the office. The two people in the office were shocked at the same time and looked at each other. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath and looked serious. He picked up the confidential phone in front of him. Okay, I got it, he said to the phone and hung up. Let's go. His voice was low and calm. The council was holding an emergency meeting. Yi Dongxing took a deep breath and subconsciously clenched his fists. Wang Jing was moved. The two looked at each other and walked out of the office one after the other. It was 10 o'clock in the morning on the 29th day of the first lunar month in Zhongzhou State. Just after the New Year, the entire Zhongzhou State and the entire Beihai suddenly welcomed an extremely violent rainstorm. The Ministry of Supervision, the Parliament, the Cabinet, and nearly 6 departments of Zhongzhou State receive a report from Jiangzhou at the same time. Report Su Xinghe, the speaker of Jiangzhou, and the informant was the speaker of Lin and Wang Jingxin. A large amount of evidence appeared on the council's desk at the same time. In the face of numerous ironclad evidences, the parliament reached a consensus in the shortest time. They asked the Ministry of Supervision of Jiangzhou to control Su Xinghe as soon as possible and the Ministry of Supervision of Zhongzhou State flew directly to Jiangzhou. It was 11 o'clock in the morning when the order was issued. It was sunny in Zhongzhou State. It was raining cats and dogs in Zhejiang. At 1:45 p.m., the Ministry of Personnel of Zhongzhou State directly issued a document and spread it all over Zhongzhou State. Su Xinghe's position as the chairman of Jiangzhou Province was revoked. The governor of Jiangzhou, Zhou Yuanshan, was appointed as the new chairman of Jiangzhou. The transfer order of the Ministry of Personnel was sent to Huading at the same time. Dongqing Qiuqi was transferred to Huading as the speaker of Wudong New Area. She served as the deputy speaker of Jiangzhou, the deputy governor of the provincial government, and the acting governor. At 2:15 in the afternoon, the torrential rain spread from Zhejiang to Jianghuai. The Jianghuai governor was transferred without any preparation. Chairman Wang Jingxin was transferred to Jianghuai as the governor. There was no sign or brewing. The violent wind and rain swept through Zhongzhou State. When everything seemed to have settled down, it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The Wang family of Beihai, Mount Dibbing. 2 cars had gone down the mountain one after another. Tang Shi and Song Si's cars. Summer Solstice's cars. One after the other, they were getting farther and farther away. Wang Shengxiao stood on the stage, a formidable person, watching the cars getting farther and farther away and finally disappearing. He took a deep breath, and his expression had become extremely calm. The enchantress stood quietly at the foot of the mountain, waiting for Wang Shengxiao's order. "Bring them," Wang Shengxiao's voice sounded. Before the thunder came, his voice sounded clear and cold on Mount Dibbing. "Bring them all here." Chapter 754. At 3:10 in the afternoon, in the sanatorium, Saint received the news from Jianghuai in Jiangzhou. As a new invincible realm expert in Zhongzhou State, although he was no longer the minister of the Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters, he still had countless information channels. Mount Shu was also more powerful than before because of his existence. The message was sent to his mobile mailbox in the form of voice. It was extremely detailed, from the debate at the council meeting to the appointment, in which giants voted for and against. Everything was clearly stated. Saint looked down at his mobile phone. His eyes fell on the new governor of Jiangzhou. The new governor of Jiangzhou, Dongqing Qiuqi. Saint frowned tightly. He looked at the name and was silent for a long time. Dongqing Qiuqi was one of the directors of Huading. She had made excellent achievements in Wudong New Area, among the senior officials at the deputy governor level in Zhongzhou State, and because she was a woman, her personal qualifications and abilities were outstanding. She had been in Wudong New Area for several years. It might be a little unusual for her to be the governor of Jiangzhou, but it was not completely unreasonable. But what she should not have done the most was to be the governor of Jiangzhou. Dongqing Qiuqi was Dongqing Wudi's daughter. Furthermore, Dongqing Qiuqi was Zhou Yuanshan's wife. Now her husband was the speaker of Jiangzhou, and his wife was the governor. The first and second leaders of a province in the southeast were husband and wife. What was this? There had never been such a situation in the hundreds of years since the founding of Zhongzhou State. It had never happened before, and it would never happen in the future. It was simply absurd. And how many deals have been made in the process of causing this absurd result? Saint was a little annoyed. He was the purest swordsman, especially when Wang Tianzong's whereabouts were unknown. He could even be said to be the #1 swordsman in Zhongzhou State today. He had been dealing with swords all his life, so he could not understand the ups and downs of the top management most of the time. But even as an outsider, he could still perceive that it was inappropriate through this appointment. So what was Dongqing Wudi thinking? Sending his daughter and son-in-law to Jiangzhou as the first and second leaders was tantamount to committing a big taboo. If there was really a problem, no matter which one of them had a problem, the other could not escape. Saint could see the danger. So how could Dongqing Wudi not know? Even if the giant group really wanted to take over Jiangzhou by force, Dongqing Qiuqi didn't have to go there. Zhou Yuanshan's ability was enough to stabilize the situation. To say the least, even if the giant group liked the position of governor, There were other candidates in the large group besides Dongqing Qiuqi. Why did he do that? Saint closed the mailbox, thought for a moment, and dialed a number. The call was hung up. The next second, the big screen on the wall of the sanatorium office lit up. Saint picked it up casually, looked at military counselor who appeared on the screen, and nodded, but said nothing. With military counselor's status in Zhongzhou State, he might get the news much earlier than Saint. Although he had the strength of a top half-step invincible realm expert, he was not a pure warrior to some extent. Military counselor. The code name was enough to show his position in Samsara Palace. Saint could be sure that he would get the information faster and more detailed than him. Even the series of things that happened today were the result of military counselor's secret promotion. Have you eaten? Military counselor greeted him lazily. His face was a little red, and he looked sleepy. I had a dinner party at noon, so I drank a little more. I just got up. Military counselor rubbed his forehead and yawned. Do the things in Jiangxia have anything to do with you? Saint asked. A little. Military counselor nodded and said calmly. Why? Why did you do that? Saint stared at military counselor in the video, and his eyes were solemn. Dongqing Qiuqi and Zhou Yuanshan are in the same province. There may be big problems. The giant group. When did you get used to thinking about problems from the standpoint of the giant group? Military counselor said in a strange tone. Saint suddenly froze. Dongqing Wudi is probably going to be set up by the Wang family of Beihai this time. But on the whole, it's not a bad thing. I have some friends in the giant group, but many of them don't like me. I don't care what they do, and I'm not obliged to be responsible for them. Before I retire, I will only think about problems from the standpoint of Tianlan. Tianlan and the giant group, neither of them represents the other. I don't see how it's good for the palace master to do so much. Saint's tone was calm, but everyone could hear the difference in his tone. In front of Li Tianlan, Saint and military counselor basically called each other the same way, calling him Your Highness. But when Li Tianlan was not there, military counselor directly called him by his name, while Saint called him Palace Master. Obviously, no matter what happened in the future, Saint would stay in Samsara Palace. As for military counselor, Flaming Fire, who had left at the beginning, and perhaps many others, they would choose to help Li Tianlan once and quietly retire after completing their missions. Military counselor took a deep look at him and said softly, That's because you don't know the information. I may not know, but do you think the giant group doesn't know? Dongqing Wudi is in charge of the army headquarters. Will he be set up by the Wang family of Beihai? Saint asked faintly. Oh, the giant group, Dongqing Wudi knows some information, but the giant group may not. All this information was suppressed by Dongqing Wudi. Judging from the result this time, Dongqing Wudi was indeed set up once, but he did it willingly. Military counselor chuckled. Make it clear. Saint was a little confused. The motion to transfer Dongqing Qiuqi has been going on for a while. The original intention of the giant group was to transfer Dongqing Qiuqi back to Zhongyuan to serve as the governor of Zhongyuan province, and transferring her to Jiangxia happened recently. At first, Wang Jingxin communicated with Zhou Yuanshan, and then Yi Dongshan communicated with Dongqing Wudi. The reason is very simple. The Wang family of Beihai is in a bad situation now, and Jiangxia must be given up. Wang Qinglei is ambitious, and the situation in Jianghuai is unstable. At this time, Wang Jingxin, the trump card that has been cultivated for a long time, can play a great role. Military counselor's tone was calm. So the Wang family of Beihai gave up Dijiang, Su Xinghe, and many things that could cause trouble. They tried their best to stabilize the internal situation of the Wang family of Beihai. At the same time, they gave up Jiangxia and used Wang Jingxin to go to Jianghuai to withstand the situation in Jianghuai. This is also a test for him, and it also strengthens the relationship with the giant group. Go on. Saint narrowed his eyes, and his eyes flickered. It's very obvious that the Wang family of Beihai wants to advance and retreat together with the giant group. The recent deal with the military also shows this. They need to reshuffle internally, and they also need to face the parliament. They must win over a strong enough ally. Pushing Dongqing Qiuqi to Jiangxia is a move to ensure the position of the giant group. It's too sensitive to put Dongqing Qiuqi and Zhou Yuanshan together. But since this transfer has become a fact, they won't move in a short time. If they move, it will have a great negative impact on them, and the giant group can't afford such a loss. So the two groups jointly put them in Jiangxia, and they must work together to maintain the current situation. So in a short time, the cooperation between the two groups can't be reversed. Saint nodded. I can understand the idea of the Wang family of Beihai, but why did the giant group agree? Yes, to be exact, it was Dongqing Wudi who agreed. Military counselor's tone was a little unfathomable. Do you know the result of the meeting of the decision-making committee just now? Zhou Yuanshan's appointment was approved by a unanimous vote, and Dongqing Qiuqi's voting result was very interesting. Among the 6 groups in Zhongzhou State, there were people in each group who agreed with Dongqing Qiuqi's transfer, and there were people in each group who opposed it. Yi Dongshang voted for it, Wang Qinglei opposed it, Dongqing Wudi voted for it, and Zhou Mulan opposed it. There were different voices within each group. Part of it is because of me, including Dongqing Wudi's promise to mobilize Dongqing Qiuqi. I also have my reasons. Saint's body shook slightly. You want to see Dongqing Wudi? Not only Dongqing Wudi, but I also went to visit by Zhan Fong. Saint said slowly. What identity did you go with? Saint's tone was solemn. That's my current face. I used the identity of military counselor. Military counselor laughed. Saint didn't speak for a long time. Military counselor wore a black cloak most of the time, and no one in Zhongzhou State knew who he was. Now that he confessed his identity with his original face, it was impossible for Bai Zhanfeng and Dongqing Wudi not to be shocked. What did you talk to him about? Saint couldn't help asking. Dongqing Wudi didn't approve of such a deal at first, but I provided some information about the Wang family of Beihai, so Dongqing Wudi nodded and agreed. He was willing to let the giant group be set up by the Wang family of Beihai. Military counselor said meaningfully, do you really think that only the Wang family of Beihai needs to reshuffle? The giant group, the loosest of the 6 groups, also needs to be reshuffled. Although the need is not as urgent as that of the Wang family of Beihai, once it starts, it will be more thorough. The Dongqing clan has been seeking change for many years. Now the time is ripe, and it's time to take action. Tianlan can't represent the giant group, and the giant group can't represent Tianlan. Do you think the situation is normal? At least Dongqing Wudi doesn't think it's normal. Li Tianlan has been cultivated as the core of the giant group from the very beginning, and his status is even higher than Zhou Yuanshan's. Now the giant group seems to be unified, but that's because Eastern Europe has provided endless benefits to the giant group. Dongqing Wudi has long wanted to change this situation. Military counselor said softly. In that case, why didn't Dongqing Wudi agree to the Wang family of Beihai's request at the beginning? Saint asked. Because Dongqing Wudi underestimated Wang Shengxiao at the beginning and didn't know his determination. Military counselor smiled. I told him, and he naturally had no scruples. Saint looked at the screen and was silent for a long time. If that's the case, he muttered, the strength of the giant group may shrink significantly, but the cohesion of the core will not change. Military counselor said blandly, and it's not necessarily the giant group. Maybe it's the Dongwang group? As for the shrinking strength you mentioned, do you really think that the trump card in my hand is useless after so many years of operating in Zhongzhou State? Saint took a deep look at him and said coldly, are you so impatient? I'm too tired these years. It's time for me to retire. Military counselor looked at him and smiled sincerely, but there was some interest in his eyes. When the situation is clearer, I should go to the desert and have a showdown with Tianlan. Saint said no more. He silently hung up the phone and looked out of the window at the sky. Under the storm, an undercurrent that was enough to change the future pattern of Zhongzhou State had surged. Obviously, except for Dongqing Wudi, no one in Zhongzhou State seemed to be aware of this undercurrent. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.